There are ruins scattered across our planet that seem to defy time itself. From Hattusa to Sigiriya and the remote statues of Easter Island, each one challenges what we think we know about the ancient world. Walls carved with impossible precision. Cities built in locations that push the limits of human survival. Structures aligned with celestial patterns, as if their creators understood the cosmos far better than we expect. What's more unsettling is not just how these places were built, but why. Their purpose remains unclear, their methods still debated. And as we uncover more, a disturbing idea begins to take shape. Perhaps ancient civilizations were not as primitive as we believe. Perhaps they were operating with knowledge we have long since lost. Deep within the vast Ural Mountains of Russia, the area of Taganay National Park has long been regarded as one of the most remote and enigmatic wilderness regions of Eurasia. Hidden among frozen forests, mist-covered slopes, and rugged rock formations that appear entirely untouched, there exists a phenomenon that causes many observers to pause and ask, is nature truly the only architect behind these structures? The rock formations of Taganay, collectively known as the Taganay stone structures, are not merely the result of millions of years of weathering. In many cases, they display characteristics that suggest intentional design, especially when viewed through the lens of geometry, where familiar natural rules begin to feel uncertain. From the very first steps into this landscape, a subtle sense of unease appears, not because the terrain is too strange, but because in certain places it seems too ordered. The rocks are not simply scattered randomly, as one would expect in most mountainous terrains. Instead, in several locations, they cluster into formations with clear structure, forming extended flat surfaces, relatively continuous straight lines, and most notably, angles that appear almost perfectly right-angled. This creates a strangely familiar impression, reminiscent of standing before an ancient architectural structure, where every detail bears signs of calculation. Yet here there is no clear evidence that humans ever constructed anything. At this point, what can be described as unnatural geometric precision becomes the central focus of the entire mystery. In nature, rocks can fracture along weak lines, forming planes, and in rare cases, somewhat defined angles. But at Taganay, what perplexes observers is the repetition and cleanliness of these features. Many rock surfaces are so flat that they appear almost polished. Their edges are not only distinct, but extend continuously with minimal interruption from irregular cracks, typically seen in natural formations. Most strikingly, near 90-degree angles, fundamental in architecture, appear here frequently enough that they cannot be easily dismissed as coincidence. Upon closer observation, it becomes clear that these are not isolated phenomena. Within the same area, multiple rock blocks share similar geometric characteristics, parallel planes, straight edges, near right angles, and sometimes even comparable dimensions. This creates the impression that they may once have been building blocks of a larger system, one that has since collapsed, leaving only scattered remnants. When placed side by side, these stones have often been compared to megalithic structures where stones were cut and assembled with remarkable precision. One aspect that strengthens the argument for a non-natural origin is how these rock blocks interact spatially. In certain locations, they appear stacked or positioned in ways that maximize stability with relatively well-matched contact surfaces. This contrasts with the typical image of rocks rolling and settling randomly. Instead, it evokes the impression of assembly not perfectly executed, but organized enough to raise the question, is this merely the result of gravity and time or evidence of deliberate placement? From here, theories begin to diverge. Some independent researchers suggest that what we see at Taganai could be the remnants of an unrecorded ancient civilization, or at least a culture that possessed stone-working techniques far more advanced than typically attributed to prehistoric societies. From this perspective, the geometrically precise stones are not random products of nature, but the result of controlled cutting, shaping, and arrangement. Over thousands of years, these structures may have been destroyed by frost erosion and geological shifts, leaving behind what we see today, formations that appear both natural and artificially influenced. However, geological science offers a different explanation, grounded entirely in natural processes. The rocks in Taganai are primarily quartzite, a very hard material that can fracture along relatively straight plains under prolonged pressure and temperature fluctuations. Freeze-thaw cycles play a critical role. Water seeps into small cracks, expands when frozen, and exerts enough force to split the rock. Over thousands of years, this process can produce blocks with flat surfaces, sharp edges, and occasionally near-right angles. Additionally, tectonic stresses within the Earth may guide fracture patterns, creating a degree of apparent order. Yet the key issue is not whether these processes can produce such shapes, but whether they can do so with such consistency and precision. In nature, aesthetically perfect forms may occur, but they are typically rare and irregular. At Taganai, the presence of multiple rocks sharing similar geometric features within the same area makes the explanation of pure coincidence less convincing to some observers. Another factor to consider is human perception itself. The human brain is wired to recognize patterns, especially those resembling architecture and design. This tendency can lead us to see meaningful structures in what are actually random formations. However, in the case of Taganai, many of these features are not merely visual impressions. They can be measured and analyzed, from surface flatness to edge linearity and angular relationships. This makes the debate more complex, as it extends beyond perception into physical reality. The deeper one investigates, the more unnatural geometric precision becomes an open question rather than a conclusion. It forces us to reconsider fundamental assumptions. Have we fully understood the capabilities of natural processes, or are we underestimating what nature can produce under extreme conditions? Conversely, is it possible that we are overlooking traces of the past simply because they do not fit within our current frameworks of knowledge? The Taganai stone structures are therefore not just a geological phenomenon, but a test of perception. These stones, with edges that seem measured, surfaces that appear shaped, and forms that blur the line between natural and artificial, create a picture that is both logical and paradoxical. And within that contradiction, the mystery of Taganai persists, not as a clear answer, but as an enduring question, reminding us that somewhere between nature and intelligence, there may still be gaps in our understanding. So what do you think? Are the Taganai stone structures purely the result of natural geological forces, or could they be the remnants of something far more deliberate and ancient? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Silently standing in the arid highlands of northern Ethiopia, the Yeha Temple is not merely an ancient ruin. It is more like a stone declaration that directly challenges how modern humans understand history and the evolution of technology. Built around the 7th century BCE, this structure belongs to a pre-Aksumite civilization that has left behind very few clear traces in historical records. There are no detailed documents, no rich written archives, and no precise descriptions of construction techniques, only massive stone blocks that still stand there, defying time, weather, and the erosion of memory. It is precisely this near-total silence that turns Yeha into one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. At first glance, the Yeha temple impresses with its remarkable durability. After more than 2,700 years, much of the structure still stands intact, with towering walls maintaining their original form and an astonishing level of stability. The stones are stacked without the use of mortar, a technique known as dry stone construction. But if that were all, Yeha might simply be considered a typical example of ancient architecture. What truly sets it apart is its precision. The stones are not merely placed side by side, but seem to lock together, perfectly forming joints that are nearly invisible. There are no significant gaps, no signs of misalignment, and notably, no clear evidence of structural degradation over time. However, what truly puzzles researchers is not how the stones were assembled, but how they were created in the first place. Upon close inspection of each stone surface, one thing becomes clear: these are not the result of crude chiseling. The surfaces are almost perfectly flat, the edges sharp and consistent, and in many cases, the stones appear to be nearly identical in size, as if they were produced according to a specific standard. This raises a critical question. Were ancient builders simply working with basic tools? Or did they possess a far more sophisticated technical system than we typically assume? It is here that the mystery of stone carving technology beyond its time begins to emerge. In many ancient civilizations, tool marks are usually visible on material surfaces, uneven cuts, chisel marks, and slight irregularities in shape. But at Yeha, such traces are either extremely faint or entirely absent in the way we would expect. Instead, the stone surfaces appear to have been processed through a highly controlled method, possibly involving precise abrasion, perfectly straight cutting techniques, or even methods that we have yet to fully replicate today. Some hypotheses suggest that the builders of Yeha may have used more advanced metal tools than those commonly associated with that period. However, the problem remains: evidence for such tools is almost non-existent. No cutting instruments with sufficient hardness have been found, no clear traces of large-scale workshops exist, and no written records describe the production process. This leads to a compelling possibility. Perhaps the technology did not lie solely in the tools, but in the methods, a way of working with stone that we still do not fully understand. As analysis deepens, the mystery becomes even more complex. The stone blocks at Yeha are not only precisely crafted, but also massive in size and weight. Quarrying, transporting, and placing such stones would have required an extremely highly organized and efficient system. What stands out, however, is the combination of scale and precision, a rare pairing even among many well-known ancient structures. Typically, as the size of materials increases, precision decreases due to limitations in tools and techniques. Yet at Yeha, both factors coexist seamlessly. Some researchers have compared Yeha's techniques to those seen in megalithic structures in distant regions such as South America or the Middle East, where stones were also shaped and fitted with remarkable accuracy. This similarity raises a broader question. Did these ancient civilizations develop comparable techniques independently, or was there a form of knowledge transmission that history has yet to fully document? The presence of Sabaean inscriptions at Yeha adds another layer of complexity. It suggests a connection between Yeha and the civilizations of South Arabia, particularly ancient Yemen. Yet, even if we accept the idea of cultural exchange, the technological questions remain unresolved. Were these stoneworking techniques imported from another civilization, or were they developed locally and later lost? And if such knowledge once existed, why was it not preserved or further developed in later periods? Another aspect that deepens the mystery is the apparent disappearance of the civilization behind Yeha. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, where continuous development and abundant records exist, the pre-Aksumite civilization seems to appear with a surprisingly advanced level of technical capability only to gradually vanish without leaving many clear traces. This creates a difficult paradox. How could a society capable of such achievements fail to leave behind a continuous legacy? The answer may lie in factors we have yet to uncover: environmental changes, shifts in trade networks, or social upheavals whose traces have faded over time. But it may also point to something more unsettling, that we still do not fully understand the true capabilities of ancient humans. Standing before the Yeha temple, modern observers are not simply looking at an ancient structure, they are confronting an open question. These stones are not just building materials, they are the result of a system of thought, a technical framework, and perhaps an entire body of knowledge that no longer exists. Every cut, every smooth surface, every perfect edge serves as a clue, a reminder that history may be far more complex than we once believed. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of the Yeha temple, not how it was built, but what it represents: a reminder that in the distant past, there may have existed peaks of knowledge and technology that we are only beginning to rediscover. What do you think? Was Yeha's stoneworking technology simply the peak of ancient craftsmanship or evidence of a lost system of knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Beneath the vast sky of the Pacific Ocean, where the sea is not merely a geographic space, but a veil concealing human history, the island of Hiva Oa in the Marquesas archipelago emerges as a point of convergence between untouched nature and the traces of an ancient, undeciphered body of knowledge. Across this island, hidden among dense forests, steep slopes and valleys long forgotten by time, lie the tiki platforms, stone foundations constructed from massive blocks upon which stand tiki statues, shaped as half-human, half-divine figures. These structures are not only remnants of an ancient Polynesian culture, but also a direct challenge to our understanding of technological capability in the past. At first glance, the stone platforms impress with their sheer scale and remarkable stability. Large stone blocks, many weighing several tons, are stacked with tight precision to form nearly perfect flat surfaces. What makes this even more astonishing is that all of this was achieved in a context where ancient Polynesians had no metal, no wheels, no draft animals, and no mechanized tools. Quarrying stone, transporting it across rugged terrain and dense forests, and placing it precisely in position represents an engineering challenge that remains complex even by modern standards. Yet what truly sets Hiva Oa apart lies not only in these platforms, but in the tiki statues themselves, the central element and spiritual core of the entire structure. The tiki statues of Hiva Oa cannot be dismissed as crude carvings. On the contrary, they demonstrate an extraordinary level of craftsmanship, especially when considered within the technological limitations of their time. Their faces, with deeply set eyes and near-perfect bilateral symmetry, along with the sharply defined lines of the mouth, nose, and decorative motifs, exhibit a level of precision that almost suggests the use of refined metal tools. The carvings are not only clear, but also consistently deep, indicating that the artisans maintained precise control over both force and direction throughout the entire process, something extremely difficult to achieve with basic stone tools. Some surfaces of the tiki statues even reveal signs of more advanced finishing techniques. They possess a smoothness and light reflective quality rarely found in untreated stone, suggesting deliberate polishing. This implies that ancient craftsmen may have used prolonged abrasion methods combining sand, water, and harder stones to achieve a refined surface. However, even with such techniques, achieving uniformity across the entire statue, especially in hard-to-reach areas, remains difficult to explain. A deeper examination of their geometric structure reveals another striking feature: remarkable consistency in proportion and design. Despite being created in different locations across the island, many statues follow a shared geometric language, from the ratio between head and body to the spacing of the eyes and the placement of facial features. This suggests that the carving process was not purely intuitive, but may have followed a standardized system of rules. But how could a culture without written language preserve and transmit such complex design principles across generations? Closer inspection of fine details only intensifies the mystery. Clean, decisive cuts, sharp angles, and smooth transitions between surfaces indicate a level of tool control far beyond what is typically attributed to this technological era. Experimental archaeology has attempted to replicate similar carvings using stone tools, but such efforts often require extensive time and rarely achieve the same level of precision. This raises an intriguing possibility: either we are underestimating the skill of ancient artisans, or there existed techniques that have since been lost and cannot yet be fully reconstructed. One commonly proposed explanation involves the use of basalt, a particularly hard stone, as the primary carving tool. Combined with sand and water, this could have formed an effective abrasion system. However, this theory still fails to fully explain how such consistent precision and sharp detailing were achieved on a large scale. Furthermore, there is limited direct evidence of the specific tools used, leaving the entire production process shrouded in uncertainty. The symbolic dimension of the tiki statues cannot be overlooked. They are not random carvings, but appear to embody deeper meanings related to ancestors, deities, or authority. This suggests that the act of carving was not merely technical, but also ritualistic, where art belief and technical knowledge were deeply intertwined. It is possible that this fusion created an environment in which skills were transmitted with remarkable accuracy and consistency, even without written documentation or formal design plans. Another possibility is the existence of an invisible technology, not in the form of machines or devices, but as a highly refined system of knowledge passed down through generations. This may have included material selection, step-by-step carving methods, or even labor organization strategies optimized for efficiency. Such elements leave little to no trace in the archaeological record, yet they are effectively encoded in the final product, the tiki statues we observe today. When viewed within the broader spatial context of Hiva-Oa, a larger picture begins to emerge. The statues are not randomly placed, but positioned on platforms according to specific alignments and layouts, forming organized ceremonial spaces. This indicates that the builders possessed not only advanced craftsmanship, but also a sophisticated understanding of spatial planning and system integration. Within this system, each tiki statue is not merely an artwork, but a functional component of a larger unified structure, where every detail holds meaning and purpose. Ultimately, what makes the Hiva-Oa tiki platforms so compelling is not just what we can see, but the questions they raise. Are these statues truly the result of traditional manual techniques, or do they represent the remnants of a lost technological capability? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. Technology does not always take the form of machines or metal. It can exist as knowledge, skill, and accumulated experience. These intangible elements may vanish without a trace, yet they endure in the structures they once created. In the stillness of Hiva-Oa, amid the wind and the endless ocean, the tiki statues remain standing, not only as witnesses of the past, but as enduring questions without answers, urging us to reconsider history through a broader lens where the boundary between art and technology fades, and where what has been forgotten may be deeper than anything we have yet understood. Do you believe the Hiva Oa tiki statues are purely the result of traditional craftsmanship, or could they be evidence of a lost technological knowledge we have yet to understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising from the desolate expanses of Central Asia, the fortresses of Khwarezm near Khiva stand as silent witnesses to a civilization that mastered survival in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Scattered across the arid plains of Uzbekistan, these ancient strongholds, among them Ayaz Kala, Toprak Kala, and Kizil Kala, form a network of defensive and administrative centers dating back more than 2 millennia. At first glance, they appear as weathered ruins, their earthen walls softened by centuries of wind and sand. Yet the longer one studies them, the more they reveal a paradox: structures built from seemingly fragile materials that have endured for thousands of years, defying both time and environment. It is within this paradox that one of their greatest mysteries emerges. How could a civilization, often labeled as ancient or primitive, achieve such a level of architectural resilience, using nothing more than earth? The answer begins with the material itself. Unlike the monumental stone blocks of Egypt or the marble of classical civilizations, the builders of Khwarezm relied primarily on mud brick, a mixture of clay, sand, water, and organic binding agents such as straw. In most contexts, this material is considered temporary, vulnerable to erosion, and structurally limited. Yet in Khwarezm, it was transformed into something entirely different. The walls of these fortresses were not merely thick, they were monumental. In some cases, they reached thicknesses of up to 10 meters, rising high above the desert floor, like artificial cliffs. This was not an accidental choice. The immense mass of these walls served multiple purposes: simultaneously thermal insulation against extreme temperature fluctuations, structural stability under constant wind pressure, and defensive strength against potential attackers. What appears simple on the surface reveals itself, upon closer examination, as a sophisticated understanding of both material science and environmental engineering. The construction techniques further deepen the mystery. Rather than stacking uniform bricks in straightforward vertical layers, the builders often employed slightly inclined walls, an intentional design that distributed weight more efficiently and reduced the likelihood of collapse. This subtle curvature, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, allowed the structures to better withstand seismic vibrations and shifting sands. Moreover, the bricks themselves were not standardized in a modern sense, yet they exhibit a remarkable consistency in size and composition. This suggests the presence of controlled production methods, possibly even early forms of quality regulation. The addition of organic fibers within the clay mixture increased tensile strength, preventing cracks from propagating through the structure. In effect, these ancient builders were manipulating composite materials long before the concept existed in scientific terminology. Equally intriguing is the way these fortresses interact with their environment. The desert is not merely a backdrop, it is an active force constantly reshaping the landscape through wind erosion and temperature extremes. Yet the Khwarezm fortresses appear designed to work with these forces rather than against them. The outer surfaces of the walls often show signs of deliberate texturing patterns that may have helped reduce wind speed at the surface, minimizing erosion. The sheer thickness of the walls also created a thermal buffer, keeping interior spaces relatively stable despite scorching daytime heat and freezing nighttime temperatures. This level of environmental adaptation suggests a deep, empirical knowledge accumulated over generations, a form of engineering, born not in laboratories, but through long-term interaction with a hostile landscape. Another layer of complexity emerges when considering the scale of construction. Building walls of such magnitude would have required not only technical knowledge, but also significant organizational capacity. Thousands of workers would have been needed to gather materials, produce bricks, transport them across difficult terrain, and assemble them into cohesive structures. This implies the existence of an administrative system capable of coordinating labor, managing resources, and sustaining large-scale projects over extended periods. The fortresses, therefore, are not just architectural achievements. They are evidence of a society with advanced social and logistical frameworks. The precision and uniformity observed across multiple sites further indicate that these techniques were not isolated innovations, but part of a shared cultural and technological tradition. Perhaps the most compelling aspect of these structures is their longevity. Despite being constructed from earth, many of the walls remain standing after more than 2,000 years. This challenges modern assumptions about durability and technological progress. In contemporary construction, materials such as concrete and steel are often seen as superior, yet they too degrade over time, sometimes within a century. The Khwarezm fortresses, by contrast, demonstrate that durability is not solely a function of material strength, but of design intelligence. By understanding the properties of their chosen materials and the conditions of their environment, the builders created structures that could endure far beyond their expected lifespan. This raises a provocative question: to what extent have we underestimated the technological capabilities of ancient civilizations? The term primitive often implies a lack of sophistication, yet the evidence from Khwarezm suggests the opposite. These builders possessed a nuanced understanding of physics, material behavior, and environmental dynamics, knowledge that was not formalized in written equations but embedded in practice. Their techniques may not fit neatly into modern categories of engineering, but they were no less effective. In some respects, they may even surpass modern approaches in terms of sustainability and adaptability. The mystery deepens when considering what has been lost. While the structures themselves remain, the knowledge systems that produce them have largely disappeared. We can analyze the materials, measure the dimensions, and reconstruct the layouts, but the precise methods, traditions, and cultural contexts behind these achievements are only partially understood. Were there specific rituals associated with construction? Did master builders pass down specialized knowledge through generations? Were there innovations that have yet to be recognized because they do not align with modern expectations? Each fortress becomes not just a physical relic, but a fragment of a larger, incomplete narrative. In the end, the fortresses of Khwarezm challenge us to rethink the relationship between simplicity and sophistication. What appears to be a basic material, earth, was transformed through knowledge, experience, and ingenuity into something extraordinary. These massive walls are not merely defensive barriers. They are expressions of a technological philosophy that prioritized harmony with the environment, efficient use of resources, and long-term resilience. They remind us that advanced technology does not always manifest as complexity or machinery. Sometimes it is found in the ability to take the most fundamental elements of nature and shape them into forms that endure against all odds. As the desert winds continue to sweep across these ancient ruins, carrying grains of sand that have witnessed countless generations, the fortresses stand as enduring enigmas. They do not reveal their secrets easily. Instead, they invite us to look closer, to question our assumptions and to recognize that the past may hold forms of knowledge that are not only different from our own, but in some ways profoundly more attuned to the world in which they were created. Were the massive earthen walls of Khwarezm simply a result of basic ancient techniques or evidence of a lost technology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Badrul Chow stone terraces concealed within the dense tropical forests of Palau stand as one of the Pacific's most quietly perplexing archaeological enigmas, an intricate network of stone-built terraces that at first glance appear modest, almost unassuming, yet reveal an extraordinary level of complexity upon closer inspection. What might initially be mistaken for simple agricultural adaptation, a practical response to uneven terrain, gradually unfolds into something far more sophisticated. As researchers began to study the site in detail, a different narrative emerged, not one of rudimentary construction, but of deliberate engineering, environmental awareness, and a technological intuition that remains only partially understood even today. These terraces are not random accumulations of stone scattered across a hillside. They are carefully composed, layered platforms that follow the natural contours of the land, each level stabilized by precisely positioned stones designed to balance structural load, resist erosion, and subtly regulate the movement of water. In a landscape defined by heavy rainfall, unstable soils, and relentless vegetation, such resilience is not accidental, it is engineered. Yet among all the questions surrounding Badrul Chow, one mystery rises above the rest in both scale and intrigue. How were these stones, many of them substantial in size and weight, transported, maneuvered, and ultimately assembled within such an unforgiving environment? This is not merely a question of construction. It is a question of logistics, of coordination, of unseen systems of effort and knowledge. Every stone resting in place today represents a silent challenge, overcome a problem solved without leaving behind a clear record of how it was done. Unlike the towering megaliths of more famous sites where sheer size dominates the narrative, Badrul Chow presents a more subtle yet equally confounding puzzle. The stones here may not be uniformly massive, but their cumulative volume, their distribution across multiple terrace levels, and the precision of their placement all point toward a sustained, highly organized undertaking, one that would have required not only physical labor, but also planning foresight, and perhaps a shared body of technical understanding. The environment itself deepens the mystery. Even today, reaching these terraces is no simple task. Dense jungle, uneven terrain, and limited visibility create natural barriers that would challenge modern construction teams, let alone an ancient society without mechanized tools. There are no visible traces of roads, no remnants of ramps or pathways that might hint at how materials were transported. No preserved infrastructure maps the journey of these stones from their source to their final position. And yet they are here, lifted, aligned, and integrated into a coherent system that has endured for centuries. This absence of evidence is not just a missing piece of the puzzle, it is part of the puzzle itself. It compels us to ask not only how these stones were moved, but why every trace of that movement seems to have vanished so completely. One plausible explanation is that the builders relied on organic materials, wooden rollers, sledges, ropes, woven from plant fibers, tools that would have been effective in their time, but have long since disappeared in the humid tropical climate. If this were the case, then the entire transport system may have erased itself, leaving behind no direct evidence of its existence. But even with such tools, the task would have been formidable. Moving heavy stones across soft, uneven ground is not simply a matter of strength. It requires coordination, timing, and control. It demands an intuitive understanding of weight distribution, friction, and leverage principles that, while not formally documented, must have been deeply understood in practice. The builders would have needed to organize labor, synchronize movement, and continuously adapt to the shifting conditions of the terrain. This level of execution suggests a degree of social organization and technical sophistication that challenges conventional assumptions about ancient island societies. Another possibility lies in the landscape itself. The builders may have harnessed natural features to aid in transport, using slopes to guide stones downward, with gravity taking advantage of wet conditions to reduce friction, or even utilizing water flows to move materials along natural channels. Such methods, while elegant in theory, introduce their own risks and complexities. They require precise timing, environmental awareness, and a high degree of control. A single miscalculation could result in a stone being lost or damaged beyond use. And yet the terraces show little evidence of such failures. The stones are not scattered or misplaced. They are integrated with intention, forming stable, enduring structures that suggest a process refined through experience. What makes this even more compelling is the apparent disconnect between the terraces and their potential sources of material. While some stones may have been gathered locally, others appear to originate from areas not immediately adjacent to the site. This raises critical questions. How far were these stones transported? Over what distances did this operation extend? And how was consistency maintained across different sections of the terraces? The logistics implied here are not trivial. They point toward a coordinated system of sourcing, movement, and construction, one that may have operated across both space and time, possibly involving multiple generations. Indeed, it is entirely plausible that the terraces were not built in a single phase, but evolved gradually. Each generation may have expanded upon the work of the previous one, refining techniques, adapting strategies, and transmitting knowledge through practice rather than written record. In this sense, the terraces become more than a physical structure. They become a living archive of accumulated expertise. The transport of stone, then, is not a one-time feat, but a repeated process, honed over time, becoming more efficient, more precise, and perhaps more specialized with each iteration. This would explain both the consistency observed in certain structural elements and the adaptability seen in others. And yet, despite all these possibilities, a sense of incompleteness remains. There is no definitive answer, no single theory that fully accounts for the evidence. The absence of direct documentation leaves space for interpretation, but also for uncertainty. Some researchers suggest that such an undertaking would have required a hierarchical social structure with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Others propose a more communal approach, where knowledge was shared and construction was a collective effort. In either case, the act of moving stone becomes a reflection of the society itself, its organization, its values, and its relationship with the environment. Perhaps the most compelling idea is also the most difficult to prove, that the builders possessed a form of practical engineering knowledge, unwritten, unrecorded, yet highly effective. Not technology in the modern sense, but a deep embodied understanding of materials, forces, and natural systems. A knowledge shaped by observation, refined through experience, and passed down through generations. If this is true, then the mystery of Badrul Chow extends beyond the visible structure. It points to something intangible that has been lost, a way of understanding the world that no longer survives. Today, the terraces endure, partially reclaimed by the forest, their stones weathered, but still firmly in place. They offer no instructions, no inscriptions, No clear explanation, only their presence, silent, resilient, and enigmatic. Each stone poses a question. How was it moved, who placed it, and what knowledge made it possible? The answers may never be fully known. But in their silence, the Badrul Chow stone terraces invite us to reconsider our assumptions about ancient technology, not as a linear path toward modernity, but as a diverse and complex landscape of human ingenuity. In the end, the true mystery of Badrul Chow may not lie in any single technique, but in the convergence of many environmental adaptation material, understanding social coordination, and accumulated knowledge. The challenge of transporting stone, seemingly straightforward at first glance, unfolds into a deeper narrative about human capability. It reminds us that even in the most remote corners of the ancient world, there existed systems of understanding that, in their own way, rival the sophistication of modern engineering. In your opinion, how did the ancient builders at Badrul Chow transport these massive stones through such dense and challenging jungle terrain? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Beneath the vast skies of the highlands of Armenia, where cold winds from Lake Sevan sweep silently across arid slopes, carrying the breath of centuries, Noratus Cemetery emerges not merely as an ancient burial ground, but as a lost technological archive of humanity. Hundreds of Khachkars, Armenia's iconic crossstones, stand in silence, weathered and covered in moss. Yet each one resembles a detailed record of a technical system that we today have only begun to understand. Here, art is inseparable from engineering, and belief itself seems encoded through geometric structures and refined crafting processes so sophisticated that they challenge every assumption about the primitive tools of the medieval world. Even at close range, the Khachkars impress with a density of detail that feels almost irrational. Interwoven patterns blanket the entire stone surface, from large framing borders down to details measuring only a few millimeters. The carvings do not feel random. They possess rhythm, structure, and order, as if designed according to a formal system rather than individual inspiration. Even more astonishing is that all of this was executed on basalt, a volcanic stone known for its hardness and dense crystalline structure. While highly resistant to weathering, basalt is notoriously difficult to carve. Under normal conditions, working such material would leave micro-fractures, uneven edges, and clear marks of impact force. Yet on Khachkars, these signs are almost entirely absent. The grooves are smooth, their edges sharply defined, and their depth remarkably consistent, giving the impression that they were cut with precision rather than chiseled in the traditional sense. Upon closer observation, it becomes clear that the beauty of Khachkars lies not only in their intricacy, but in the hidden logic beneath their design. The patterns are not arranged arbitrarily. They follow strict geometric principles. Axes of symmetry are maintained with near perfection. Motifs repeat in structured cycles, and many smaller elements appear as scaled-down versions of the whole, suggesting a form of recursive, almost fractal-like organization. Circles, spirals, and interwoven grids combine into a geometric language that ancient craftsmen may have fully understood, while modern observers can only attempt to interpret. Yet what truly puzzles researchers is not the conceptual design of these forms, but the ability to realize them physically on such a hard material with such extraordinary precision. At this point, the greatest mystery of Noratus begins to reveal itself, the enigma of invisible tools and techniques seemingly ahead of their time. There is little archaeological evidence clearly showing what tools were used to create Khachkars. No fully preserved workshops, no complete toolkits found alongside the stones, and almost no written records describing the process in detail. What remains are the finished works themselves, and the incredibly subtle traces left on their surfaces. Yet it is precisely these traces that provide the most intriguing clues. First, the carved lines demonstrate an almost perfect control of force. Traditional hammer and chisel techniques typically produce shock waves through the stone, often causing cracks or fractures at weak points. However, many Khachkars show no such evidence. The edges of the grooves are crisp with no chipping, and the interior surfaces are relatively smooth. This suggests that the craftsman may not have relied solely on impact, but instead used a combination of carving, grinding, or cutting, possibly incorporating abrasive materials, such as sand, or employing harder metal tools. Even this hypothesis, however, does not fully explain the results. Many curved elements display near-perfect roundness, with consistent radii and seamless transitions between segments. Achieving such forms through freehand carving alone, especially on hard stone, is extremely difficult. These features hint at the possible use of guiding mechanisms, rudimentary compasses, templates, or even rotational tools that could maintain stable motion. Yet concrete evidence for such devices in this context remains elusive, deepening the mystery. Another factor, adding complexity, is the layered nature of the carvings. Many Khachkars feature multi-tiered reliefs where patterns are stacked to create a clear sense of depth. Achieving this requires removing material in stages while preserving specific sections with precise thickness. A deviation of even a few millimeters could compromise the entire composition. This level of control implies not only exceptional skill, but also a structured workflow, possibly involving preliminary sketches, marked guidelines, and a carefully planned sequence of execution. In other words, this was not improvisation, but a process closer to systematic production than pure artistic expression. One compelling hypothesis suggests that the true secret lies not in the tools themselves, but in the integration of tools and knowledge. Ancient craftsmen may have developed an oral technical tradition where methods were passed from master to apprentice across generations without ever being formally documented. These methods could have included stone selection, reading internal grain structures, controlling applied force sharpening tools, and even feeling the material through sound and vibration during carving. If such a system were disrupted by war migration or cultural transformation, the entire body of knowledge could vanish within a few generations, leaving behind artifacts that later societies struggle to replicate. What deepens the mystery further is the relative consistency of technique across different Khachkars. While each stone has its own unique design and artistic identity, the methods of execution, groove formation, layering, and detail handling show notable similarities. This indicates that the skill was not limited to a single extraordinary individual, but rather belonged to a shared and somewhat standardized technical tradition. Yet, if such a system once existed, why have so few direct traces of it survived? Modern researchers have attempted to recreate Khachkars using traditional tools to test these theories. The results demonstrate that it is indeed possible, but extremely time-consuming and requiring exceptional craftsmanship. Even the best reproductions often lack the sharpness and uniformity of the original works. This suggests that we may still not fully understand the exact methods or tools that were used. Standing among the hundreds of stones at Naratus, enduring through centuries, one begins to sense something beyond conventional archaeology. This is not merely a story of gravestones, but of a technical system that reached a remarkable level of sophistication and then almost completely vanished from history. These invisible tools may not have been machines in the modern sense, but rather a fusion of simple instruments, refined techniques, and deep material knowledge. And perhaps that is what makes Kashgars truly mysterious. Not because they are impossible to explain, but because the explanation, if it once existed, may have been lost. What remains are stones patterns and an almost unbelievable precision, along with a gap in our understanding, where the past seems to whisper yet never fully reveals its voice. So what do you think? Were the Kashgars of Naratas Cemetery created using only simple tools and extraordinary patience? Or do they point to a lost system of knowledge and techniques that we no longer understand today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Kamyana Mohyla, an isolated sandstone mound rising from the vast plains of southern Ukraine, has long stood as a strange anomaly in both geology and human history. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a weathered cluster of rocks, a lifeless remnant of an ancient sea that once covered this region millions of years ago. But as one approaches stepping into its narrow crevices and layered labyrinth-like interior spaces, that initial perception quickly dissolves. In its place emerges a different realization. This is not merely a natural formation, but a space that has been occupied and transformed by human presence over an almost unimaginable span of time. There are no walls, no traces of an ancient city, no monumental architecture like pyramids or temples. Yet Kamyana Mohyla contains something else entirely, a form of memory carved directly into stone, where thousands of images and symbols have been created, layered, and preserved across tens of thousands of years. For this reason, many researchers have referred to it as a prehistoric stone library, not because it contains writing in the modern sense, but because it holds an immense volume of information that we still cannot fully decipher. The structure of Kamyana Mohyla itself is highly unusual. Rather than being a single monolithic rock, it consists of numerous large sandstone slabs naturally stacked upon one another, forming a mound that is not particularly tall, just over 10 meters, but internally incredibly complex. Within it lies a network of narrow fissures, small caves, and enclosed spaces that resemble natural rooms. These spaces were not designed by humans, yet they were clearly used by them in a systematic way. Notably, most of the carvings are not found on the outer surfaces, where sunlight is abundant, but deep within these dark and difficult-to-access interiors. This strongly suggests that the carvings were not random or purely decorative, but intentional acts, possibly ritualistic, symbolic, or even a form of recording or communication that we have yet to understand. The carvings at Kamyana Mohyla span multiple eras, from the Paleolithic period to later cultures such as the Scythians. Their content is remarkably diverse: animals like bison, horses, and deer, creatures closely tied to prehistoric survival, human figures in various poses, abstract symbols, and geometric patterns that some researchers believe may relate to maps, natural cycles, or even astronomical observations. Yet what truly sets Kamyana Mohyla apart is not just the content or the sheer number of these carvings, it is how they were created. This is where the mystery deepens, and where interpretations range from grounded scientific explanations to more controversial theories. Sandstone, by nature, is a granular material and relatively softer than rocks like granite or basalt. This might suggest that carving into it is easy, but in reality, it presents significant challenges. When force is applied unevenly, sandstone can easily chip or fracture, producing uncontrolled cracks that damage the surface. Creating deep, continuous carvings with clean edges requires extremely precise control of force, especially when the available tools were likely limited to stone bone or wood. Yet at Kamyana Mohyla, many carvings display a remarkable level of control. The lines are not only deep, but also consistent with minimal signs of chipping, and in some cases, they show smooth, directional transitions, as if the creator had a clear design in mind before beginning. This raises an almost unavoidable question. How could people living tens of thousands of years ago with extremely limited technology achieve such precision? One common hypothesis suggests the use of flint, a material capable of producing sharp edges suitable for cutting or scraping sandstone. However, even with such tools, maintaining uniform depth over extended lines would have been extremely difficult, especially in low-light conditions. This leads to another theory that the technique was not simply direct carving, but a combination of methods, light scraping to outline shapes, grinding to smooth surfaces, and repeated passes to achieve the final result. If so, each carving would not have been the product of a single quick action, but of a prolonged process requiring patience, skill, and possibly knowledge passed down through generations. Yet certain details remain difficult to fully explain. Some carvings show evidence of multiple stages of processing. The surface appears to have been flattened first, then the primary lines established, followed by the addition of finer details. This sequence resembles more advanced craftsmanship techniques seen in later civilizations, where work is structured into clear, organized stages. This suggests that the creators of these carvings may not have relied solely on individual skill, but possessed a shared body of knowledge, a form of technology in the broader sense, even without machinery. The environmental context adds another layer of complexity. Most carvings are located in enclosed spaces where natural light barely reaches. This means the creators would have needed artificial lighting, likely fire or torches. However, firelight is unstable, producing flickering illumination and shifting shadows that distort perception. Under such conditions, creating precise and consistent lines becomes even more extraordinary. This has led some researchers to propose that ancient people may have developed supportive techniques such as preliminary marking before carving or collaborative work to maintain accuracy. When all these factors are considered together, difficult material properties, limited tools, challenging working conditions, and highly precise outcomes, one conclusion becomes increasingly clear. We may have underestimated the technical abilities of prehistoric humans. Kamyana Mohila is not just an archaeological site. It is evidence that technology does not necessarily depend on metal or machines. It can exist in the form of knowledge, skill, and accumulated experience, a refined craft tradition that modern observers may struggle to fully reconstruct without its original context. For this reason, Kamyana Mohila raises not only questions about the meaning of its carvings, whether they represent language, belief systems, or collective memory, but also challenges our understanding of the past itself. Perhaps the people who created these engravings were not as primitive as we once assumed. Perhaps they possessed a system of knowledge that has largely been lost to time, leaving only its traces on stone. And perhaps those traces, the deep, precise carvings that seem so simple at first glance, are in fact the clearest evidence that human history is far more complex than we can easily explain. Kamyana Mohila still stands there in the middle of the vast plain, unchanged and silent. The carvings remain hidden in the darkness of its stone chambers, as if waiting for a moment when humanity will finally be able to truly understand them. And until that moment comes, it will continue to exist as one of the most profound and quiet mysteries, a place where stone is not just material, but memory, technology, and an unanswered question at the heart of human history. What do you think these carvings truly represent? Ancient art, a lost language, or a forgotten form of technology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Beneath the vast freezing and seemingly endless skies of Caucasia, where relentless winds sweep across barren steppes and winters can turn the ground into solid stone, there exists an ancient structure that challenges everything we think we know about prehistoric human capability, Salbik Kurgan. Built by the Tagar culture between the 7th and 3rd centuries BCE, this site may at first appear to be nothing more than a massive burial mound. Yet the deeper researchers look, the clearer it becomes that this is not simply a tomb, but a carefully planned, highly organized stone complex, one that conceals technical mysteries far beyond what is typically attributed to ancient Siberian societies. And within this entire structure, the most astonishing, most debated, and most difficult element to explain is the presence of enormous stone blocks, towering pillars weighing dozens of tons, standing as if in defiance of logic itself. These stones are not secondary details. They are the very foundation that defines Salbik Kurgan. Arranged in an almost perfectly rectangular enclosure, they surround a central area that once hosted rituals or burials. Each slab rises between 6 and 8 meters high and can weigh up to 50 tons. Standing before them, a modern observer cannot help but feel diminished not only by their sheer size, but by the lingering question they impose: how were such massive stones transported and erected in an age when advanced technology seemingly did not exist? The mystery deepens when considering the geographical context. The area surrounding Salbik Kurgan lacks nearby large stone sources, meaning these massive slabs must have been transported from distant locations, possibly tens of kilometers away or more. Imagine moving a 40 or 50-ton object across uneven steppe terrain, without roads, without machinery, and without lifting systems. Even today, such a task would require careful planning, specialized equipment, and skilled engineers. Yet over 2,000 years ago, an ancient culture accomplished this feat not just once, but repeatedly for multiple stones. Conventional explanations often point to simple methods: wooden rollers, ropes, and human labor. But upon closer examination, these theories reveal significant limitations. Dragging a multi-ton stone requires immense force, not to mention the challenge of controlling its direction and preventing it from tipping. Wooden rollers would require a large supply of timber, something not abundant in the steppe environment. Ropes would need to withstand extreme tension, yet materials of the time may not have been durable enough for sustained use. Most importantly, none of these methods adequately explain the final and most critical step: how were these enormous stones raised and set upright with near-perfect precision? Some researchers suggest that the Tagar people may have exploited Siberia's harsh winters when the ground freezes solid and snow covers the terrain to slide stones across low-friction surfaces. The idea has merit, as ice significantly reduces resistance. However, even if transportation became easier, the challenges of controlling movement, positioning the stones accurately, and then raising them upright remain unresolved. How could they ensure each stone was placed in the correct position and angle without collapse? At this point, the issue is no longer brute strength. It is engineering, a domain we rarely associate with ancient cultures in this region. What is truly remarkable is that the stones at Salbik Kurgan were not merely erected, they were arranged with striking precision. The sides are nearly parallel, the corners approach perfect right angles, and the spacing between stones is consistently maintained. This indicates that construction was not random, but followed a deliberate plan, possibly involving measurement alignment and repeated verification. In other words, these stones are not just building materials, they are the outcome of a technical mindset far more advanced than we fully understand. As research deepens, it becomes clear that the mystery of these massive stones is not only about how, but also about why. Why would an ancient community invest such immense effort into constructing a structure that appears on the surface to be a burial site? Even for a powerful leader, the scale seems excessive. This suggests that the stones may have held meanings beyond physical function. They could represent symbols of power, astronomical markers, or elements of complex rituals that remain unknown to us. Some scholars propose that the stones may have functioned as markers or antennas within a system connected to astronomy or spiritual belief. If this is true, then their placement and alignment become even more critical, further emphasizing the level of precision required in their construction. Yet even if this theory holds, it still fails to answer the most fundamental question: how was all of this achieved? Another more controversial possibility is that the Tagar people inherited knowledge from an earlier civilization, one that developed techniques later lost to history. In this view, Salbik Kurgan is not a beginning, but a remnant of a longer chain of knowledge. The massive stones, with all their complexity, may be the visible traces of a technological system of which we now see only fragments. Regardless of the explanation, one fact remains unchanged. The stones of Salbik Kurgan directly challenge our understanding of the past. They force us to reconsider the capabilities of ancient people, the level of sophistication in cultures once labeled primitive, and the gaps that still exist in our historical knowledge. Standing among these towering stones evokes not only awe, but also a subtle unease, as if we are confronting something we are not yet equipped to fully comprehend. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of Salbik Kurgan. Not merely how the stones were moved or raised, but the simple fact that they exist at all, that over 2,000 years ago, in a remote and unforgiving land, humans created something that still leaves us searching for answers. The stones remain silent, yet their silence carries a question that echoes across time. Have we truly understood our past, or have we only begun to glimpse the surface of a far deeper story? So what do you think Salbik Kurgan really is? Are those massive stone blocks simply the result of ancient human strength and ingenuity? Or are they the remnants of lost knowledge technology that we still cannot fully understand today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden along the eastern shores of Lake Onega, within the cold and almost isolated wilderness of Karelia, the petroglyphs of Onega exist as an ancient record carved directly into stone, not in a language we can read, but through images, symbols, and technique. Created approximately 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, these carvings do not merely reflect the daily life of prehistoric people. They reveal a level of thought and material control far beyond what we typically associate with the Neolithic era. From the very first encounter, the petroglyphs of Onega evoke a sense of unease and fascination. Unlike typical rock carvings that depict hunting scenes or everyday activities, this site presents forms that are difficult to interpret: birds with unnaturally elongated beaks, hybrid creatures that seem half human and half animal, and abstract shapes that do not belong to any known symbolic system. These images do not function as simple records of life. Instead, they appear to express a symbolic way of thinking, a kind of visual language that has been lost to time. The more closely one observes, the clearer it becomes that the placement of these carvings is intentional. They are not randomly distributed, but concentrated along the water's edge, where reflected sunlight from the lake can illuminate the engravings at specific moments. When viewed from the water, the carvings become more visible, as if they were designed to communicate with observers in motion. This has led many researchers to believe that the site may once have been a ritual space where waterlight and stone combined to create a symbolic or even spiritual experience. Yet while their imagery and placement already provoke curiosity, it is the carving technique itself that transforms the petroglyphs of Onega into a true mystery, not a mystery of meaning, but of capability. To fully grasp the remarkable nature of the technique at Onega, one must begin with the material itself, granite. This is an extremely hard stone with a dense crystalline structure that makes carving into its surface a serious challenge, even with modern tools. In a time thousands of years ago, when metal was not yet widely used and no machinery existed, the creation of clear engravings on granite seems almost unbelievable. Yet at Onega, we find not just carvings, but lines that are precise, consistent, and aesthetically refined. The engraved lines show no signs of randomness. They maintain relatively uniform depth, with clean edges that have not fractured, something that would easily occur if force were applied unevenly to such a hard surface. Many figures feature long continuous curves that remain smooth and uninterrupted, suggesting that the creators were not merely striking the stone, but carefully controlling both force and direction. This is not instinctive action. It is the result of developed skill. The most widely accepted method used is known as pecking, repeatedly striking the stone surface with a harder object to create small indentations that form a line. However, at Onega, many lines no longer display the individual impact marks typical of this method. Instead, they appear as continuous grooves, smoother and more unified. This leads to an important hypothesis after the initial carving. Ancient craftsmen may have performed an additional finishing step, perhaps grinding, rubbing, or polishing the surface to refine the lines. If this is true, then the technique at Onega goes beyond simple image creation. It includes surface treatment, representing a significant leap in technical thinking. This implies that prehistoric people were not only concerned with carving shapes, but also with how those shapes would be perceived, how light would interact with the surface, and how the lines would appear within their environment. Another factor that highlights this advanced level of skill is proportion and composition. Many carvings are large, stretching several meters in length, yet they maintain consistent proportions across the entire figure. This suggests that the creators were not working impulsively, but had the ability to mentally visualize the complete form in advance. Without drawings or precise measuring tools, maintaining such proportions would require exceptional spatial awareness and estimation skills. Moreover, there are indications that the carvings may have been created in stages. Some figures show slight variations in depth or style, as if they were added to or modified over time. This suggests that the site was not the work of a single individual, but rather the product of a technical tradition passed down through generations. If so, then the carving technique at Onega was not merely an individual skill, it was a form of cultural technology, preserved, refined, and developed over time. This fundamentally changes our perception of Neolithic societies. They were not simply surviving, but actively developing expertise, accumulating knowledge, and transmitting it across generations. The question of tools also remains crucial. With no clear evidence of metal use, it is likely that harder stones, such as quartz or diabase, were used. Yet even with such materials, achieving smooth, precise lines on granite would require both time and advanced technique. This means that each carving could represent hours or even days of continuous labor. And here, another layer of complexity emerges: labor organization. To produce large, consistent, and precise carvings, there may have been a division of roles, one individual designing another, executing the rough carving, and another refining the details. This suggests a structured society in which skills were specialized to some extent. The petroglyphs of Onega, therefore, are not merely ancient images resting silently along a lakeshore. They are evidence of a technical capability that challenges our assumptions about prehistoric humanity. These carved lines do not only represent figures, they embody an understanding of material force-light and space. And perhaps the greatest mystery lies not in what these carvings mean, but in how they were made. In a world without modern technology, without widespread metal tools, humans were able to create works of such precision, refinement, and consistency. What do you think? Is this simply the result of patience and time, or does it hint at a level of technical knowledge we have yet to fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Silently resting in the wild landscapes of Khakassia, not far from the mighty Yenisei River, Boyarskaya Pisanitsa is far more than a typical archaeological site. It resembles a stone chronicle, carved by people who lived thousands of years ago. Across its ancient rock surfaces, hundreds of engravings appear like scattered fragments that, when viewed together, form a deeply symbolic whole, a vanished world, where humans, animals, nature, and unseen beliefs intertwine within a system of expression that remains only partially understood today. What makes Boyarskaya Pisanitsa truly remarkable is not only its age, but the way it vividly captures everyday life, almost to an extent that feels unexpected for an ancient culture. Unlike many other petroglyph sites that focus on abstract symbols or religious motifs, this site portrays highly concrete scenes, houses with roofs, groups of people gathering, hunting activities, animal herding, and even compositions that resemble family life. These images are more than art. They are like frozen frames of time, preserving fragments of ancient existence. Upon close observation, one can sense the rhythm of a community, how they organized their living spaces, how they interacted, and how they adapted to the harsh Siberian environment. Beyond the imagery itself, the arrangement of the carvings raises further questions. They do not appear randomly scattered, but seem to follow a deliberate structure. Humans, animals, and architectural elements are placed in clear spatial relationships, forming scenes with internal logic, almost as if they can be read like a story. This has led many researchers to suggest that Boyarskaya Pisanitsa may represent a primitive system of communication, a kind of visual language used to record, memory, transmit knowledge, or perform communal rituals. Among the most intriguing elements are the carvings depicting houses and built environments. These images suggest organized architectural forms, complete with roofs, frames, and sometimes even indications of interior space. This raises a compelling question: did the people who created these carvings possess more advanced construction knowledge than we assume, or are these representations symbolic in nature? Perhaps these are not literal dwellings, but spiritual structures, houses of ancestors, ritual spaces, or symbolic realms beyond the physical world. Regardless of interpretation, these carvings clearly go beyond simple depiction. They merge reality with symbolism, the material with the spiritual. Yet even all of these remarkable aspects are overshadowed by what may be the greatest mystery of Boyarskaya Pisanitsa: its stone carving techniques, a feature that continues to challenge conventional assumptions about ancient human capabilities. When examined up close, the carvings reveal an almost extraordinary level of precision. The engraved lines are not only clear, but maintain a surprisingly consistent depth, giving the impression that they were created with tools capable of controlled force and direction. Fine details such as human limbs, animal horns, or the outlines of structures are rendered with striking balance and clarity. There is little evidence of hesitation, misalignment, or major error. This is particularly puzzling when viewed within the technological context of the time. Based on current understanding, the creators of these carvings likely had access only to simple tools, hard stone bone, or early forms of metal. There were no machines, no precision measuring instruments, and no technological systems to ensure uniform execution. Yet the final result demonstrates a level of craftsmanship that even today would require significant skill and time if done entirely by hand. One commonly proposed explanation is the pecking technique, in which a hard object is repeatedly struck against the rock surface to gradually form an image. However, this method typically produces uneven indentations and lacks precise depth control. In contrast, the carvings at Boyarskaya Pisanitsa appear smoother and more consistent, suggesting either a refined variation of this method or an entirely different approach. Another hypothesis suggests the use of abrasive materials combined with tools to gradually grind the stone surface, producing finer and more controlled lines. But if this were the case, further questions arise. Where did these materials come from, and how were they used with such precision? Some researchers argue that the key lies not in the tools themselves, but in mastery of technique, a tradition passed down through generations where artisans developed near-mechanical control over pressure angle and rhythm. If true, Boyarskaya Pisanitsa would not only be an artistic site, but also evidence of a highly advanced form of manual technology, a level of craftsmanship that is difficult to replicate today without modern tools. Adding to the mystery is the near absence of production traces. There are few stone fragments, no clearly identifiable worn tools, and almost no unfinished or failed carvings. This creates the impression that the entire process was executed with exceptional planning and control, leaving behind almost no evidence of error. Was this simply the result of extraordinary skill, or are we missing a crucial part of the story, a lost method, tool, or technology that has vanished entirely? Beyond the technical aspects, the meaning of the carvings remains uncertain. Some human figures appear unusual, possibly wearing distinctive headgear or garments, hinting at the presence of shamans or ritual specialists. Abstract symbols are interwoven with realistic imagery, forming a complex system of expression that has yet to be deciphered. It may represent a visual language or a symbolic system, tied to spiritual beliefs and communication with unseen realms. All of these elements make Boyarskaya Pisanitsa one of the most fascinating and enigmatic archaeological sites. It raises questions not only about the past, about people, society, and belief, but also about the limits of ancient human capability. How were such precise carvings achieved? What tools were truly used? And perhaps most importantly, what was the real purpose behind all of this? Perhaps within the silence of the stone, the answers are still waiting. Until we fully decipher what has been carved into these ancient surfaces, Boyarskaya Pisanitsa will remain a powerful reminder that the past is far more complex than we often assume, and that sometimes the deepest mysteries are those etched most permanently into stone. What do you think these carvings truly represent? Are they records of daily life, spiritual symbols, or a lost form of ancient communication? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising quietly within the dense forested hills of Kanheri Caves, the Kanheri Cave water system stands as one of the most understated yet profoundly sophisticated achievements of the ancient world. At first glance, the site appears to be a monastic complex carved into dark basalt rock, a sanctuary shaped by devotion and time. But hidden within its walls, channels, and surfaces lies something far more remarkable: a fully integrated hydraulic system that transforms seasonal rainfall into a stable, long-term water supply. Unlike monumental temples or towering fortifications, this system does not impress through scale alone. Its true power lies in its intelligence, a seamless fusion of geology, climate awareness, and engineering intuition that continues to function even today. And at the heart of this entire network lies its most fascinating component, the automatic rainwater harvesting system, a design so elegantly simple that it challenges modern assumptions about ancient technological limitations. To understand the brilliance of Kanheri's water system, one must first consider its environmental context. Located near Mumbai, the region experiences intense monsoon seasons, followed by long dry periods. Water, therefore, is not a constant resource, but a fluctuating one, abundant for a few months, scarce for the rest of the year. Any long-term habitation, especially one supporting a monastic community, would require not just access to water, but control over it. And this is precisely where the ingenuity of Kanheri begins to reveal itself. Rather than relying on nearby rivers or wells, the ancient builders turned their attention upward to the sky itself. Rainwater, unpredictable yet plentiful, became the foundation of a system designed to capture, direct, filter, and store every possible drop. What makes the rainwater harvesting system at Kanheri so extraordinary is that it operates entirely without mechanical assistance. There are no pumps, no valves, no moving components, only gravity, stone, and precision. The surfaces of the rock above and around the caves were carefully shaped to guide rainwater into a network of narrow channels, each carved directly into the basalt. These channels are not random grooves or erosion patterns. They are deliberate constructions, engineered with a level of accuracy that suggests deep planning and understanding. Their angles are subtle but exact, ensuring that water flows steadily without stagnation or overflow. Even more impressively, the system accounts for varying intensities of rainfall. During heavy monsoon downpours, excess water is diverted efficiently, preventing damage to the structures. During lighter rains, the channels still function effectively, capturing and directing even minimal runoff. The idea of such a system may seem straightforward today, but its execution at Kanheri reveals layers of complexity that are difficult to ignore. The builders had to calculate gradients across uneven rock surfaces, anticipate the behavior of water under different conditions, and ensure that the flow remained consistent across multiple interconnected sections. This was achieved not through digital modeling or advanced instruments, but through observation, experience, and perhaps a form of empirical knowledge that has since been lost. The result is a system that behaves almost like a living organism, responsive, adaptive, and remarkably efficient. One of the most striking aspects of this automatic system is its invisibility. Unlike aqueducts or irrigation canals that dominate the landscape, the Kanheri channels blend into the rock itself. They follow natural contours, enhancing rather than disrupting the environment. This suggests a philosophy of design that prioritizes harmony over dominance, integration over imposition. The builders were not forcing water to behave in unnatural ways. They were guiding it, working with its tendencies rather than against them. In doing so, they created a system that requires no intervention, no maintenance in the conventional sense, and no external energy source. It simply works season after season, year after year, century after century. As water travels through these channels, it is directed into a series of cisterns strategically positioned throughout the cave complex. Each cistern is carefully located to maximize collection efficiency, often placed at points where multiple channels converge. The transition from channel to storage is seamless, with entry points designed to minimize contamination and sediment buildup. While there is no obvious filtration system in the modern sense, the journey of the water itself acts as a natural purification process. As it flows over rock surfaces and through narrow pathways, heavier particles are left behind, and the porous nature of basalt may contribute to further filtering. By the time the water reaches the cisterns, it is often clean enough for consumption, a detail that continues to puzzle researchers. Yet perhaps the most compelling mystery is not how the system works, but how it was conceived. There are no surviving blueprints, no written records detailing its construction, no inscriptions explaining its logic. And yet every element of the system fits together with remarkable coherence. The channels align with the topography, the cisterns correspond to the needs of individual caves, and the entire network operates as a unified whole. This implies not only technical skill, but also a level of planning and coordination that is rarely attributed to ancient monastic communities. Were these systems developed gradually over time, refined through trial and error? Or were they the result of a single comprehensive design, an architectural vision that integrated water management from the very beginning? The absence of clear answers only deepens the sense of intrigue. Modern engineers studying Kanheri often express admiration for its efficiency, noting that similar principles are now being rediscovered in sustainable design practices. Rainwater harvesting, gravity-fed systems, and passive filtration are all considered cutting-edge in the context of environmental engineering today. And yet, at Kanheri, these ideas were implemented nearly 2,000 years ago without the benefit of modern science or technology. This raises an uncomfortable question. Have we underestimated the capabilities of ancient societies? Or perhaps more provocatively, have we lost certain forms of knowledge that were once commonplace? What is undeniable is that the Kanheri cave water system represents a form of intelligence that transcends time. It is not merely a relic of the past, but a functioning example of sustainable engineering, one that continues to offer lessons for the present and future. In an era where water scarcity is becoming an increasingly urgent global issue, the principles embodied in this ancient system feel more relevant than ever. Efficiency without complexity, durability without dependency, harmony without compromise. These are not just characteristics of Kanheri, but ideals that modern infrastructure often struggles to achieve. And so the caves remain carved into stone and silence their channels, still guiding rainwater as they have for centuries. No machinery hums, no switches are flipped, no human hand intervenes. The system activates itself with the arrival of rain, performs its function with quiet precision, and endures long after the storm has passed. It is, in every sense, automatic, not because it relies on technology, but because it was designed so perfectly that it no longer needs it. Do you think this automatic water system is simply the result of knowledge accumulated over centuries, or evidence of an ancient level of engineering we still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden within the quiet plains near Evora, the colossal structure, known as Anta Grande do Zambujeiro, stands not merely as an ancient tomb, but as a contradiction, carved into stone, a contradiction so immense that it challenges the very foundation of how we understand prehistoric humanity. Built between roughly 4000 and 3000 BCE, this monument emerges from a time that modern narratives often describe as technologically limited, a world without advanced metal tools, without mechanical lifting systems, without written engineering principles. And yet what rises from the earth here is not simple, not primitive, and certainly not expected. It is vast, calculated, and overwhelmingly ambitious. Above all else, it is massive, so massive that its very existence forces us to reconsider what primitive truly means. The first and most striking element of Ante Grande do Zambujeiro is not its purpose nor its symbolism, but its sheer scale. This is not a modest dolmen or a minor burial structure. It is one of the largest megalithic monuments in all of Europe. The vertical stones, known as orthostats, rise dramatically from the ground, reaching heights of 5 to 6 meters. Each of these monoliths weighs tens of tons, their surfaces weathered by millennia, yet still imposing in presence. They are arranged in a roughly circular or polygonal chamber, forming a central space that once held the remains of the dead. But even this alone does not capture the full magnitude of the structure. Resting atop these towering stones is the most astonishing feature of all, a colossal capstone estimated to weigh over 70 tons. This single slab of rock transforms the monument from impressive to nearly incomprehensible. It is not simply large, it is disproportionately large relative to the technological capabilities we attribute to its builders. To place such a stone atop upright supports requires not only immense strength, but also precision, coordination, and an understanding of balance that borders on engineering. The capstone does not merely sit, it rests in equilibrium, its weight distributed across the supporting stones in a way that has allowed the structure to endure for thousands of years. And here lies the central mystery. How does a society without cranes, without steel tools, without pulleys or modern mechanics, lift and position a 70-ton slab several meters above the ground? How do they ensure it does not crack, tilt, or collapse during placement? Even today, moving such a stone would require careful planning, specialized equipment, and trained engineers. Yet the builders of Ante Grande do Zambujeiro achieved this with resources that by all accounts should have been insufficient. Conventional explanations attempt to bridge this gap. Some suggest the use of earthen ramps gradually raising the stone by pulling it up a slope of packed soil. Others propose wooden rollers, sledges, and coordinated labor with dozens or even hundreds of individuals working in unison. Lever systems may have been employed to incrementally lift the stone into position. These theories are plausible in isolation, but when combined with the actual scale of the monument, they begin to strain under their own assumptions. The weight involved is immense, the precision required is unforgiving, and the margin for error would have been minimal. To fully grasp the challenge, one must imagine the process step by step. First, the quarrying of the stone itself, separating massive blocks from bedrock, using only stone tools, fire-setting techniques, or simple wedges. Then, the transportation phase, dragging these enormous stones across uneven terrain, possibly for kilometers, without paved roads or wheeled vehicles capable of bearing such weight. And finally, the erection phase, raising the stones upright, anchoring them securely, and then placing the capstone atop them without destabilizing the entire structure. Each phase alone is formidable. Together, they represent a level of logistical complexity that suggests far more than brute force. This is why the scale of Ante Grande do Zambujeiro cannot be dismissed as mere ambition. It implies knowledge, practical, tested, and refined knowledge. The builders may not have written equations, but they understood weight distribution. They may not have had blueprints, but they grasped spatial organization. They may not have had machines, but they knew how to use the environment, earthwood, and gravity itself as tools. And yet this knowledge exists without a clear origin. There are no surviving manuals, no inscriptions detailing the construction process, no direct evidence of a technological tradition that could easily account for such achievements. What remains is the structure itself, silent, enduring, and deeply perplexing. The scale also raises questions about the society behind it. A project of this magnitude would have required not only labor, but coordination. Hundreds of individuals, possibly more, working over extended periods. This implies leadership planning and a shared purpose strong enough to justify the immense effort. It suggests a community capable of organizing large-scale construction long before the rise of formal states or written administration. In other words, it challenges the assumption that complexity in human society emerged only later. Moreover, the monument's size may have served a symbolic function. A structure so large would not only house the dead, it would dominate the landscape. It would be seen from afar, remembered across generations, and perhaps revered as a sacred place. Its very scale could have been a statement of power, of belief, of connection to something beyond the human world. Some researchers have even suggested that its orientation may align with celestial events, drawing comparisons to sites like Stonehenge. If true, this would further elevate the monument from a burial site to a cosmological marker. Inside the chamber, archaeological findings, human remains, pottery, and tools confirm its use as a collective tomb. But these artifacts feel almost secondary when compared to the structure itself. They tell us who was buried there, perhaps even how they lived. But they do not explain how such a monument was built, nor why it needed to be so large. And that imbalance is precisely what makes Antegrande do Zambujeiro so compelling. The function is understandable, the materials are simple, but the scale, immense, disproportionate, almost excessive, remains difficult to reconcile with the context in which it was created. Today, the monument still stands, weathered but unbroken, its massive stones holding their positions as they have for millennia. It does not offer answers. It does not reveal its methods. Instead, it confronts us with a possibility that prehistoric humans were capable of far more than we have traditionally believed. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how the stones were moved, but how we have come to underestimate those who moved them. So what do you think? Was the massive scale of Antegrande do Zambujeiro simply the achievement of prehistoric humans? Or could it be evidence of ancient knowledge that has been lost over time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The story of Tel Rehov Apiary begins in the fertile Beit Shean Valley, a place that once stood at the crossroads of ancient trade routes and civilizations. At first glance, Tel Rehov appears to be just another archaeological mound in the Near East, layered with the remains of forgotten generations. But beneath its surface, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary, an organized, large-scale apiary dating back nearly 3,000 years to the 10th or 9th century BCE. This was not a simple rural activity or a handful of hives scattered behind homes. Instead, what emerged from the dust was a carefully planned, almost industrial operation, one that suggests a level of sophistication in agriculture and economic organization that challenges many assumptions about the ancient world. Rows of cylindrical clay beehives were found stacked in orderly formations, each constructed with remarkable consistency. These hives were not crude containers. They were engineered objects, designed with a deep understanding of both bee behavior and human needs. One end was sealed, while the other featured a small entrance hole, allowing bees to move in and out while protecting the colony inside. A removable lid allowed ancient beekeepers to harvest honey and wax with relative efficiency. The uniformity of these hives, along with their dense arrangement, suggests a standardized production system, an early form of agricultural specialization that goes far beyond subsistence living. Estimates suggest that the apiary may have contained between 100 and 200 hives capable of producing significant quantities of honey and beeswax. In a world where sugar was unknown, honey was not merely a luxury, it was one of the most valuable natural sweeteners available, used in food medicine and ritual practices. Yet while the scale and design of the Tel Rehov apiary are impressive, the true mystery lies deeper within the bees themselves. Scientific analysis of bee remains discovered at the site revealed something unexpected. These bees did not match the genetic profile of local Levantine species. Instead, they showed strong similarities to a subspecies native to Anatolia in what is now modern-day Turkey. This discovery transformed the site from an impressive agricultural installation into a profound archaeological puzzle. If the bees were not local, then they must have been brought there deliberately. And that raises an extraordinary question. How did ancient people transport live bee colonies across such vast distances? The journey from Anatolia to the Baitshian Valley would have spanned hundreds of kilometers, crossing varied terrain and requiring careful planning. Transporting bees is not a simple task, even with modern technology. Bees are highly sensitive to temperature, vibration, and environmental stress. A poorly managed journey can easily destroy an entire colony. Yet the people of Tel Rehov appear to have succeeded in doing exactly that, importing and sustaining non-native bees in a completely new environment. This implies not only advanced logistical capabilities, but also a sophisticated understanding of beekeeping. They would have needed to know how to calm the bees, how to protect the queen, how to ensure proper ventilation, and how to maintain the structural integrity of the hive during transit. It is possible that hives were sealed and transported at night when bees are less active, or that smoke was used to pacify them, techniques still used in traditional beekeeping today. But even with these methods, the scale implied by Tel Rehov suggests repeated success, not a one-time experiment. This leads to a deeper layer of mystery. Why import bees at all? If local bee populations existed, what advantage did the Anatolian species provide? Some researchers suggest that these imported bees may have been more productive, less aggressive, or better suited for controlled beekeeping. In other words, the people of Tel Rehov may have been selectively choosing a superior strain of bees, engaging in a form of early biological optimization. If true, this would represent a remarkable level of agricultural knowledge, one that borders on proto-scientific breeding practices. It suggests that ancient societies were not only observing nature, but actively manipulating it to improve efficiency and output. The presence of imported bees also points to the existence of long-distance trade networks far more complex than previously assumed. Moving goods such as metals, pottery, or textiles is one thing. Transporting living organisms is another entirely. It requires coordination, expertise, and a shared understanding between distant regions. The bees of Tel Rehov may have been part of a broader exchange system, one that connected communities across the Eastern Mediterranean in ways we are only beginning to understand. This raises further questions: who initiated the exchange? Were there specialists dedicated to beekeeping and bee transport? Was this knowledge widespread, or was it closely guarded within a particular community or elite group? Beyond the mystery of the bees themselves, the Tel Rehov apiary also reveals much about the economic and cultural importance of honey. In ancient societies, honey was often associated with wealth, purity, and even divinity. It was used in offerings to deities, in medicinal remedies, and as a preservative. Beeswax, too, had a wide range of applications from candle making to sealing containers. The scale of production at Tel Rehof suggests that this was not merely for local consumption. It is highly likely that honey and wax were traded commodities distributed across regions and possibly integrated into broader economic systems. The apiary therefore may have functioned as a specialized production center within a larger network of exchange. And yet, despite its apparent success, the Tel Rehov apiary did not endure. Archaeological evidence indicates that the site was destroyed by a significant fire, an event that abruptly ended its operation. The cause of this destruction remains uncertain. It could have been the result of conflict, an accidental blaze, or even a targeted attack. What is more intriguing, however, is what followed, or rather, what did not. After the destruction of the apiary, there is little evidence of similar large-scale beekeeping operations in the region for centuries. The knowledge, techniques, and organizational structure that made Tel Rehov possible seem to vanish from the archaeological record, as if this advanced system had been a localized phenomenon that was never fully transmitted to future generations. This disappearance adds another layer to the mystery. How could such an effective and valuable system simply fade away? Was the knowledge lost due to social upheaval or population decline? Or was it intentionally kept secret, known only to a small group whose disappearance meant the end of the practice? The idea that ancient technologies could emerge, flourish, and then vanish without leaving a lasting legacy challenges the linear way we often think about progress. Tel Rehov suggests that history may be filled with such lost innovations, moments of ingenuity that, for reasons we do not fully understand, were never carried forward. In the end, the Tel Rehov apiary stands as both a testament and a question. It testifies to the ingenuity, adaptability, and ambition of ancient people who were capable of building complex systems and managing living resources on a large scale. But it also poses questions that remain unanswered. How did they master the art of transporting bees across vast distances? Why did they choose non-native species? And why did this knowledge disappear? Perhaps the most compelling mystery is not just how advanced Tel Rehov was, but how much of the ancient world's knowledge has been lost to time. The bees of Tel Rehov, quietly entombed for millennia, remind us that history is not always a straight path of progress. Sometimes it is a landscape of forgotten peaks, moments when human understanding reached remarkable heights only to fade into silence, leaving behind fragments for us to rediscover and wonder at once more. What do you think was the Tel Rehov apiary? The result of isolated innovation or evidence of a wider lost system of ancient knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tullstorp runestone is not merely a memorial stone from the Viking Age. It stands as one of the most debated artifacts when it comes to the technical capabilities of ancient Norse societies. Beneath the image of a coiling serpentine creature and lines of ancient runes lies a profound, unresolved question: were the craftsmen who carved this stone over 1,000 years ago truly relying on simple primitive tools? Or did they possess techniques, perhaps even technologies, far more sophisticated than we have long assumed? A closer examination of its details, particularly the carved grooves, reveals something far more compelling. This is not simply the product of labor and patience. It appears instead to be the outcome of a structured, methodical process, an approach that aligns more closely with engineering logic than with isolated acts of craftsmanship. The most striking feature And the focal point of all debate is the remarkably deep and uniform carving technique. At first glance, the grooves forming the serpent's body and the runic inscriptions may seem ordinary, even familiar, in their handcrafted appearance. Yet under close inspection, especially when viewed under angled light, an anomaly becomes immediately apparent. The depth of the grooves remains astonishingly consistent along their entire length, whether in straight segments, gentle curves, or sharply bending arcs. This directly contradicts the inherent nature of stone carving with primitive tools, where applied force inevitably fluctuates with each strike, each shift in hand position, and each variation in the material's surface. Natural stone is far from uniform. Even within a single slab, there can be variations in density hardness and microscopic fractures invisible to the naked eye. When a craftsman works with a hammer and chisel, each contact with a different section of the material produces a different response. Sometimes the tool bites deeper, sometimes it rebounds, leading to inevitable inconsistencies in groove depth. And yet on the Tullstorp runestone, such inconsistencies are almost entirely absent. The grooves extend with a level of stability that compels researchers to ask a critical question. Was there a method of force control at play that we do not yet fully understand? Beyond depth, the edges of the carved grooves present another remarkable feature. In traditional stone carving, especially along curved paths, maintaining clean, unbroken edges is extraordinarily difficult. Each strike introduces micro-vibrations that can cause the stone to fracture unpredictably. However, on this stone, even the most fluid curves of the serpent retain edges that are crisp, controlled, and largely free of chipping. This suggests not only mastery over applied force, but potentially the use of a technique that allowed for even distribution of pressure along the entire groove, rather than concentrating force at isolated impact points as seen in conventional carving. One plausible explanation is that the carving process was not executed in a single pass, but rather through a carefully controlled sequence of stages. The craftsman may have first traced the intended path with shallow incisions, then gradually deepened the grooves along the same trajectory, increasing depth incrementally. Finally, a smoothing or polishing phase may have been applied to refine the surface and eliminate minor irregularities. Yet even with such a multi-step approach, achieving near-perfect uniformity remains extremely difficult unless some form of specialized tool or guiding system was involved. This leads to one of the most provocative theories, the possibility of advanced tools not in the modern electronic sense, but in the form of simple yet effective mechanical devices, perhaps even primitive rotary tools. If Viking craftsmen developed a mechanism capable of rotational motion, powered by hand, cord, or foot, it could have enabled continuous contact between the cutting edge and the stone surface. Such a tool would naturally produce grooves that are smoother, more uniform, and more consistent than those created by repeated hammer strikes. The result would be carvings that closely resemble the precision of modern cutting techniques. Another critical factor is force control during curved motion, arguably the most difficult aspect of stone carving. As a tool moves along a curve, particularly a tight one, the craftsman must constantly adjust both angle and pressure to prevent uneven depth. Yet, on the Tullstorp runestone, the curves maintain a striking consistency, as though the applied force had been standardized according to some underlying principle. This raises the possibility of a guiding system, perhaps a template framework or marking technique that allowed the craftsman to maintain a stable trajectory and consistent pressure throughout the carving process. Another feature that reinforces the technological nature of this artifact is the continuity of the carved lines. Rather than appearing as a series of short segmented cuts, each bearing the mark of individual strikes, many of the grooves seem to flow as though they were created in a single, uninterrupted motion. Such continuity is exceptionally difficult to achieve using traditional methods where each lift and repositioning of the tool introduces small deviations. This fluidity suggests a technique that allowed the craftsman to move along the stone's surface without interruption, an approach far closer to modern carving systems than to primitive practices. Of course, one cannot dismiss the possibility that all of this is simply the result of extraordinary skill. Viking craftsmen were, after all, highly accomplished artisans with generations of accumulated knowledge in working metal, wood, and stone. It is entirely possible that their expertise reached a level of precision that now appears almost unnatural to us. Yet when viewed as a whole, uniform depth, sharp edges, seamless continuity, and stable curves, it becomes increasingly difficult to attribute everything solely to individual skill. Instead, it points toward the existence of a coherent technical system, a set of principles and tools that were refined, standardized, and transmitted, but ultimately lost to time. When all these elements are considered together, the Tullstorp runestone transcends its identity as a simple memorial or artistic expression. It emerges as the product of a highly controlled, technically driven process, one in which every groove appears calculated, measured, and executed with remarkable precision. And it is precisely this that transforms the stone into a profound mystery. Is it the pinnacle of human craftsmanship, or does it represent the remnants of a technological tradition that has vanished from history? Ultimately, what makes the Tullstorp runestone extraordinary is not just what it says, but how it was made. It challenges our assumptions about the past and opens the door to a compelling possibility that ancient civilizations may have possessed methods and tools far more advanced than we have ever imagined. And if that is true, then every carved line on this stone is not merely the trace of a human hand, but the echo of a body of knowledge long buried in the passage of time. So, what do you think was the Tullstorp runestone? The result of extraordinary human craftsmanship, or evidence of a lost technology far more advanced than we realize? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden deep within the vast Sahara today, a land of relentless winds, shifting sands, and near-total silence, an extraordinary discovery has forced scientists to rethink the entire timeline of human civilization. Inside a remote rock shelter at Ouanmahouguiag, the remains of a small child dating back roughly 5,500 years were found in a state that far exceeded expectations. The body was not only preserved, it bore unmistakable signs of deliberate human intervention. This was not a natural mummy formed passively by the desert's dry climate, but a body that had undergone a series of intentional, carefully structured procedures. And it is precisely this detail that makes the discovery so profound. It predates the sophisticated mummification techniques of ancient Egypt by millennia, raising a fundamental question: have we misunderstood the true origins of the art of preserving the dead? As researchers examined the remains more closely, a remarkable realization began to emerge. This child had not been left to natural decomposition. Instead, the body had been treated through a structured, multi-step process, one that even by modern standards reveals a striking internal logic. The internal organs had been removed, a critical and revealing detail. This indicates that those who performed the procedure understood a key truth about decomposition, that it begins from within, and more importantly, that it could be slowed or controlled. To achieve this, they must have possessed practical knowledge of the human body, where to cut, how to access the internal cavity, and how to do so without destroying the external form. This was not a random act or a symbolic gesture. It was intentional, informed, and very likely refined through generations of observation and practice. Following this step, the body was not abandoned. but further treated to dry the tissues, an essential measure to prevent decay. Whether through controlled exposure, the use of natural environmental conditions, or other early techniques, the goal remained clear: eliminate moisture, the primary driver of decomposition. This reflects a deep intuitive understanding. They may not have known about bacteria or chemistry, but they understood cause and effect. They observed decay and learned how to intervene. In essence, this is the foundation of early science observation, repeated experimentation, and gradual refinement. Perhaps the most astonishing phase comes next. The child's body was carefully wrapped in animal skin, possibly from a goat or antelope. This was not merely a simple covering. It may have functioned as a controlled microenvironment, shielding the body from external elements while maintaining its internal condition. The wrapping was neither loose nor improvised, it was precise and deliberate. The skin acted almost like a biological casing, both protective and preservative. From a modern perspective, this resembles a form of controlled preservation packaging, a concept typically associated with far more advanced civilizations. At this point, the similarities with ancient Egyptian mummification become difficult to ignore. In both cases, we observe the same logical sequence: removal of internal organs, controlled drying, and careful wrapping for long-term preservation. While the materials and specific methods differ, the underlying principles are strikingly similar. This leads to a controversial hypothesis: was mummification independently invented in multiple regions, or is it the remnant of a much older body of knowledge, one that once spread across cultures before disappearing due to time and environmental change? If the latter is true, then the Yuan Muhugyag child mummy may represent one of the few surviving fragments of a lost intellectual tradition. Some scholars argue that this is a case of parallel development, that different societies could arrive at similar solutions when faced with the same problem. However, the level of sophistication observed here challenges that explanation. This is not a simple act of preservation, but a multi-step process, with each stage dependent on knowledge and experience. Such complexity suggests continuity: knowledge accumulated, refined, and passed down across generations. It reflects a tradition, not a coincidence. And like many ancient traditions, it may have disappeared, not because it failed, but because the world around it changed. The environmental context is equally crucial. 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was not the barren desert we see today. It was a vibrant landscape, rich with lakes, vegetation, and wildlife supporting thriving human communities. In such an environment, mummification was not a necessity imposed by extreme dryness. It was a choice. This reinforces the idea that the practice was not merely technical, but deeply ritualistic, rooted in belief, meaning, and perhaps a desire to transcend death itself. They were not simply preserving a body, they were preserving identity, memory, and something beyond the physical form. The posture of the body, curled, as if asleep, further reinforces this interpretation. This was not a random burial, but a deliberate arrangement, suggesting that death was seen not as an end, but as a transition. The use of animal skin may have carried symbolic meaning, perhaps offering protection to the soul or expressing a connection to the natural world. In this worldview, humans and animals were not separate, but part of the same cycle of life. These details reveal a sophisticated belief system, one that challenges long-standing assumptions about the intellectual and spiritual depth of prehistoric societies. The child, estimated to be around 2 to 3 years old, remains an enigma. There are no clear signs indicating the cause of death, yet the level of care involved in the mummification is undeniable. This was not an ordinary burial. It required time, effort, and knowledge resources not easily given in a prehistoric context. The child may have held a special place within the community. Or perhaps the explanation is simpler and more powerful. Even in prehistory, human emotion, grief, love, and memory was strong enough to inspire extraordinary acts. In that moment, within a once green Sahara, people were not merely confronting death, they were trying to understand it, control it, and perhaps, in some way, transcend it. Ultimately, the Uwan Muhugiag child mummy is more than a remarkable archaeological discovery. It is a challenge to the narrative we believe we understand. If such advanced techniques existed so early in a region once considered peripheral to civilization, how much knowledge has been lost over time? Does the history we reconstruct truly reflect humanity's development, or is it only a fragment shaped by what has survived? And if such techniques once existed, what caused them to disappear without leaving clearer traces? Today, in the silence of the Sahara, the small mummy remains quiet, enduring, and unresolved. It reminds us that the past is rarely simple and almost never linear. Sometimes the oldest things hold the most advanced ideas, and sometimes what we believe we understand is only the beginning of a much deeper mystery. What do you think? Was this an independent discovery or evidence of a lost ancient knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Talayot of Sonfornes stands as one of the most enigmatic and intellectually provocative remnants of prehistoric Europe, a place where stone preserves not only structure but unanswered questions. Rising from the landscape of Majorca, these circular towers known as talayots appear outwardly simple, yet are profoundly deceptive. At first glance, they resemble nothing more than piles of ancient rock shaped into rough forms. But the longer one studies them, the more unsettling their existence becomes. Embedded within these structures is a striking contradiction: a society labeled primitive, yet capable of producing architecture that even today resists full explanation. At the heart of this mystery lies their most remarkable feature: the massive stone construction itself, a technological paradox that challenges everything we assume about prehistoric capability. The talayots of Sonfornes were built using cyclopean masonry, a method defined by the use of enormous irregular stone blocks assembled without mortar. Yet describing these stones as merely large fails to capture their true scale. Some weigh several tons, and still they are positioned with a level of precision that suggests deliberate engineering rather than crude stacking. Each block appears to have been carefully selected, shaped, and placed so that it locks seamlessly into surrounding stones, forming a stable and cohesive structure. There is no cement, no binding agent, no hidden reinforcement, only gravity balance and an almost surgical understanding of how weight interacts with form. The result is a structure that has endured for more than 3,000 years, resisting time, weather, and natural forces with a resilience that feels almost unnatural. What makes this even more astonishing is the technological context in which these structures were built. The Talayotic people lived during a time when advanced metal tools were limited or entirely absent in the earliest phases. Iron, which would later revolutionize construction, was not yet widely available. Instead, they likely relied on stone tools, wooden implements, and perhaps early bronze. This raises a fundamental question for archaeologists: how were such tools capable of shaping and manipulating stones of this magnitude? Cutting stone with precision requires not only strength, but control. Transporting multi-ton blocks requires coordination, planning, and mechanical advantage. Yet there is little direct evidence of cranes, pulleys, or wheeled transport systems at Sonfornes. Conventional explanations rollers, sledges, or earthen ramps offer partial answers, but they fail to fully explain the extraordinary accuracy achieved. Moving massive stones is one challenge. Positioning them with near-perfect precision is another entirely. The precision of the construction becomes even more evident when examining the joints between stones. Unlike many ancient structures where gaps are visible and irregularities are common, the talayots display an almost seamless fit. The stones interlock so tightly that even modern tools struggle to find space between them. This suggests that the builders were not merely stacking rocks, they were engineering a system. Each stone had a role, a position, a purpose within a broader structural logic. The walls often slope slightly inward, a design choice that enhances stability and directs weight toward the center. This was no accident. It reflects an understanding of structural dynamics typically associated with far more advanced civilizations. Inside the talayots, the mystery deepens further. Many contain a central column itself, constructed from massive stone blocks, supporting horizontal slabs that form an inner chamber. This internal support system is remarkably sophisticated. It distributes weight, evenly prevents collapse, and allows the tower to reach significant height. The presence of such a feature suggests that the builders understood load-bearing principles, not through theory, but through practice experimentation and accumulated knowledge. They may not have written equations or drawn blueprints, but they clearly understood how to make stone stand against gravity and endure. Perhaps even more intriguing is the consistency of these architectural features across different talayots. Despite being constructed over extended periods, possibly by different communities, the structures share a common design language. Circular layouts, central columns, inward-sloping walls. These are not random elements, but recurring patterns. This suggests a shared body of knowledge passed down through generations. Yet without writing or formal education systems, how was such complex knowledge preserved with such precision? Oral tradition alone seems insufficient, and yet the evidence suggests that somehow it was enough. The durability of the talayots presents another challenge to conventional thinking. Many ancient structures, even those built with advanced materials, have deteriorated over time. But the talayots of Sonfornes remain standing largely intact. This resilience is not only due to the strength of stone, but also to the construction method itself. The absence of mortar, often seen as a limitation, may actually contribute to their longevity. Without rigid binding, the stones can shift slightly under stress-absorbing energy instead of cracking. It is a form of flexibility within rigidity, a paradox that modern engineering has only recently begun to understand. All of this leads to a conclusion that is both fascinating and unsettling. The builders of Sonforni possessed a level of practical engineering knowledge that we do not fully understand. Not because it was technologically advanced in the modern sense, but because it was fundamentally different. It was based on direct interaction with materials, on observation, and on trial and error refined over generations. It relied not on abstract theory, but on experience. And through that experience, they developed solutions that were remarkably effective. The scale of labor required to construct these towers also implies a society capable of organization and cooperation. Moving and placing stones of such size would have required coordinated effort planning and leadership. Yet unlike other ancient civilizations, the talayotic culture left behind no inscriptions, no monumental records, no names of rulers or architects. Only the structures themselves remain silent, enduring and unexplained. In the end, the massive stone architecture of the talayot of Sonfornes is not merely a technical mystery, it is a philosophical one. It forces us to reconsider our assumptions about progress, intelligence, and what it truly means to be advanced. Here was a society without writing, without widespread metal tools, without what we would define as technology, and yet it created something that has endured for thousands of years, something we still struggle to fully explain. And perhaps the most unsettling thought of all is this knowledge can exist, can be mastered, and can be lost, leaving behind only stone as its final testimony. What do you think about the Talayot of Son Fornez? Is it simply the result of primitive construction techniques refined over time, or could it be evidence of a lost form of knowledge that we still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Under the relentless sun of the Yucatan Peninsula, where the ancient city of Chichen Itza rises from the earth, like a memory etched in stone, there stands a structure that challenges both emotion and reason. At once the Toltec Chichen Itza skull platform, known as the Tzompantli. At first encounter, it overwhelms the senses, a surface saturated with skulls, repeating endlessly, leaving almost no space untouched. It feels brutal, almost excessive, as though deliberately designed to confront the viewer with the raw inevitability of death. Yet that initial shock quickly gives way to something deeper, something far more unsettling, not because of what is depicted, but because of how it is constructed. The Tzompantli is not merely a monument, it is a system, a controlled, deliberate composition in which repetition is not incidental, but fundamental. And it is here that the structure begins to reveal its most profound mystery, the possibility that what we are witnessing is not simply art, but a form of production stone carving elevated to something approaching an industrial process. The platform's surface is organized with striking precision. Rows of skulls stretch horizontally, intersected by vertical alignments that form a rigid grid-like structure. Each skull occupies a fixed position, as if placed within an invisible framework governing the entire composition. There is no sense of improvisation, no randomness, no meaningful deviation. Instead, there is consistency, persistent, disciplined, almost mechanical. Each skull echoes the next in proportion and structure, hollow eye sockets carved with depth, nasal cavities, sharply defined teeth etched in steady rhythmic sequence, and contours that reveal an anatomical awareness far beyond simple stylization. As light moves across the surface, shadows fall in uniform patterns, amplifying the repetition and creating a visual rhythm that feels engineered rather than handcrafted. It is at this point that the idea of stone carving that is nearly industrial becomes impossible to ignore. In the modern world, such uniformity would immediately suggest molds, machinery, or standardized production systems. Yet here, within a pre-industrial civilization, we are confronted with the same visual outcome, precision and repetition at scale, without any clear evidence of the tools we would expect. The artisans of the Toltec civilization and the Maya world worked with stone, using tools that by modern standards would be considered rudimentary, and yet the result defies those limitations entirely. One possible explanation lies in advanced geometric planning. It is conceivable that the builders divided the stone surface into a precise grid before carving began, using stretched chords, marked intervals, or proportional systems based on the human body. Such a framework would allow multiple artisans to work simultaneously while maintaining strict consistency across the entire structure. If each individual followed the same measurements, identical spacing, depth, and proportions, the cumulative effect would be indistinguishable from machine-like uniformity. In this sense, the industrial quality of the Tzompantli may not lie in the tools themselves, but in the process, in the presence of a shared system guiding production. Another hypothesis points to the use of primitive templates. Not molds in the modern sense, but reusable outlines or guides perhaps made from wood leather or incised reference markings that could be transferred repeatedly onto the stone. Once the primary forms were established, artisans could refine the details by hand, preserving both uniformity and subtle individuality. This would explain why the skulls appear almost identical at first glance, yet reveal slight variations upon closer inspection. It is not mechanical duplication, but controlled replication, standardization shaped by human hands. Even so, the scale of the work remains staggering. Carving a single skull into limestone demands time, precision, and physical endurance. To repeat that process hundreds, even thousands of times implies not only skill, but organization. It suggests the existence of a coordinated labor force divided into specialized roles and operating under structured oversight. Some may have been responsible for layout, others for rough carving, and others for finishing details. This division of labor mirrors the logic of an assembly line, a concept typically associated with industrial societies, yet clearly echoed here in a much earlier form. In this light, the Tsompantli represents not only artistic achievement, but administrative sophistication, a system capable of sustaining large-scale, long-term production. What makes this even more compelling is how seamlessly this technical precision merges with symbolic meaning. The skulls are not merely decorative elements. They are charged with cultural and spiritual significance. Interwoven among them are serpentine forms associated with Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, linked to creation knowledge and cosmic order. These elements do not disrupt the structure, they reinforce it, binding the entire surface into a unified visual language. Through this lens, the repetition of skulls may represent cycles, life and death, destruction and renewal, sacrifice and continuity. What appears industrial becomes symbolic, a visual echo of cosmological belief. This duality between system and symbolism is what elevates the Tsompantli beyond conventional interpretation. It is not simply a structure built to display skulls, nor merely a surface for artistic expression. It is a convergence point where technical discipline and philosophical meaning become inseparable. The repetition is not just a method, it is a message. It speaks of order imposed upon chaos of structure, emerging from mortality of humanity's attempt to understand its place within a vast cyclical universe. And yet, despite all these interpretations, the central question remains unresolved. How did a civilization without modern tools achieve such consistency at such scale? Was it purely the result of disciplined planning and collective labor, or does it hint at systems of knowledge, mathematical, organizational, perhaps even technological, that we have yet to fully understand? The absence of clear answers is precisely what sustains the mystery. To stand before the Tsompantli today is not simply to observe a relic of the past, it is to confront a paradox. A structure that appears ancient, yet behaves visually and conceptually like something strikingly modern. It challenges long-held assumptions about the limits of ancient societies, not by presenting something unfamiliar, but by revealing something disturbingly familiar: repetition, standardization, system. Qualities we associate with industry manifesting here centuries before industry itself. And perhaps that is the most unsettling realization of all. Not the skulls themselves, but the process behind them: ordered, repeatable, scalable. A process suggesting that the boundary between ancient craftsmanship and industrial thinking may not be as clear as we once believed. Within those endless rows of carved skulls lies more than symbolism, more than ritual. There may be the echo of a forgotten methodology, a way of thinking that allowed ancient builders to transform raw stone into a system so precise, so consistent, that even today it forces us to reconsider the true capabilities of the past. Do you think that Tzompantli is just an ancient ritual or evidence of a lost technology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Masrur temples is one of the rare ancient structures in the world that can make modern archaeologists, engineers, and architects pause and ask, to what extent did people in the past truly understand and control matter? Quietly nestled in the hills of Himachal Pradesh, Masrur is not merely a temple complex, it is like a secret frozen in stone, where every detail reflects a level of technical mastery that history has yet to fully explain. What makes Masrur absolutely unique, and also its greatest mystery, is the fact that the entire complex was carved directly from a single rock mass. This is not a metaphor, it is literal truth. No stones were transported from elsewhere, no assembly process took place, and there was no layer-by-layer construction. Everything we see today, from the towering main shrine and surrounding temples to each column corridor and carved detail, was released from an original block of sandstone. In other words, Masrur was not built upward but brought into existence by removing what was unnecessary. Imagine standing before a massive rock, and instead of constructing a structure from separate materials, you must look through that stone and see the entire architecture hidden within. You must know exactly what to preserve and what to remove, and every decision is irreversible. That is the essence of monolithic construction, a method that allows no mistakes. If a column is carved too deeply, it loses its load-bearing capacity. If a roof is made too thin, the entire structure could collapse. There is no repair, no second chance. And yet Masrur still stands with a complete, balanced, and stable layout across centuries. This raises one of the greatest questions: how could ancient craftsmen execute a project with such near-total risk? The only plausible answer is that they possessed an exceptionally advanced ability to visualize three-dimensional space. They did not merely design on paper, perhaps they had no paper at all, but instead held the entire structure in their minds, from the overall layout down to the smallest detail. Every strike of the chisel was not just a physical act, but the realization of an invisible blueprint already fully formed in the craftsman's mind. Masrur consists of a central temple surrounded by smaller shrines arranged in a clearly symmetrical layout. This reflects the Nagara architectural style of North India, with shikara towers rising sharply toward the sky. However, what sets Masrur apart is that this constructed architectural style is achieved through a subtractive carving process. Instead of assembling parts, the ancient builders removed material to reveal architectural forms. This is a completely reversed approach to conventional construction, requiring an almost absolute level of control and prediction. Another factor that increases the complexity of the structure is the material itself. Sandstone is not easy to work with. Its granular structure makes it prone to cracking if force is uneven, and it does not tolerate major errors. To create flat surfaces, sharp angles, and intricate decorative details on such a material, craftsmen had to control their tools with remarkable precision. Astonishingly, despite the absence of modern machinery, the surfaces of Masrur exhibit a level of uniformity and balance that almost appears machine-made. Another crucial question is, where did the process begin, and how was it carried out? Based on similar sites, like Ellora Caves, many researchers believe Masrur was carved from the top downward. This method helps prevent structural collapse during excavation. However, it also demands that the craftsman see the entire structure before it exists. Standing on top of the rock, they had to know exactly what would lie beneath a corridor, a chamber, or a sculpture. This is not just engineering, but a highly advanced form of abstract thinking. Masroor is not only a technical achievement, but also evidence of a complex social system. Such a structure could not have been created by a few individuals. It required a large, organized workforce operating over many years, perhaps even decades. This suggests that the society behind Masroor had sufficient resources, stability, and a unified purpose strong enough to sustain a long-term project whose results would not be immediately visible. However, what makes Masroor even more mysterious is the possibility that it was never fully completed. Some areas appear less refined, as if the work was abruptly halted. This opens the door to many theories. Perhaps a major event, war, natural disaster, or a shift in religious practices forced the project to be abandoned. If true, Masroor is not just a structure, but a snapshot in progress, capturing a moment when humanity was engaged in something monumental but unfinished. What remains today also bears the marks of time and nature. The 1905 earthquake caused significant damage, collapsing parts of the structure. Yet even in its incomplete state, Masroor retains its grandeur and symmetry, proving the extraordinary strength of its foundational design. This only deepens the admiration for its creators. They did not merely build for the present, but seemingly created something capable of defying time itself. In front of the complex lies a still body of water that reflects the entire structure like a natural mirror. This reflection creates a powerful visual effect, as if there are two Masroors, one in the physical world and one in reflection. This raises questions about whether the pool was part of the original design and whether it held ritualistic or symbolic significance. To this day, the identity of Masroor's builders remains unclear. There are no ancient texts describing its construction, no definitive records of its time or purpose. Scholars estimate it may have been built around the 8th century and associated with Hindu traditions featuring deities such as Rama, Lakshmana, and Sita. However, these conclusions remain hypotheses based on indirect evidence, and it is here that Masroor becomes one of the most fascinating mysteries of the ancient world. It is not only a remarkable technical achievement, but also an unanswered question. How could ancient people execute such a complex monolithic project? What tools did they use? How did they organize such an effort? And most importantly, why did they choose a method so difficult it borders on the impossible, instead of simpler construction techniques? Masroor temples ultimately are more than a monument. They are a reminder that history is not always complete, and that there are achievements of the past we still do not fully understand. Among silent stones, one question continues to echo through the centuries. Do we truly know the limits of those who came before us? After everything you've just discovered about Masroor temples, what do you think? Do you believe this incredible monolithic structure was the result of advanced, lost knowledge, or simply the peak of human skill and patience in the ancient world? And why would its builders choose such an extremely difficult method instead of simpler construction techniques? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Hidden within the harsh, arid landscape of the Negev desert, Shifta emerges as a living paradox of history, a city that once thrived in a place where natural conditions seemed to completely deny the possibility of human survival. Built and flourishing during the era of the Byzantine Empire, Shifta was not merely an ancient settlement, but a mysterious testament to the adaptability, ingenuity, and environmental mastery of ancient people. Stone walls still stand firm. After millennia, churches with distinctive domes retain much of their original form, and ancient streets remain visible beneath layers of desert sand, creating the eerie impression that the city has been frozen in time. Yet while its architecture is impressive, it is agriculture, an almost impossible agriculture, that holds the key to Shivta's greatest mystery. In the natural conditions of the Negev desert, water is almost a luxury. Annual rainfall is extremely low, sometimes appearing only as brief and unpredictable showers, insufficient to sustain any stable agricultural ecosystem by conventional standards. Daytime temperatures can scorch the ground, while nights bring sudden cold, creating extreme temperature fluctuations. The soil is nutrient-poor, hardened, and lacking moisture, an environment that even modern agricultural techniques struggle to adapt to. And yet within these seemingly impossible conditions, the people of Shivta not only survived, but developed an organized, large-scale, and remarkably effective agricultural system. Archaeological evidence shows that they cultivated grapes, olives, and various food crops plants that are far from easy in terms of water and soil requirements. Remains of vineyards, terraced fields, and water management systems still exist today, like fragments of a once highly efficient and well-functioning system. This creates a clear paradox. How could a place with almost no water sustain an agricultural system strong enough to feed an entire population and even produce surplus? The answer lies in one of Shivta's most remarkable achievements, its sophisticated rainwater collection and management system. The inhabitants did not search for large water sources, they learned to make use of what little they had. Every drop of rain, no matter how small, was treated as a precious opportunity. They engineered the surrounding landscape to capture water. Natural slopes were utilized and modified to direct rainwater toward agricultural areas. Small channels were carved directly into soil and stone, forming a precise network that guided water to specific locations. Underground cisterns built from stone could store water for long periods, while minimizing evaporation, an essential factor in a desert environment. What truly makes this system impossible in a positive sense is the technique known as runoff farming agriculture, based on surface water flow. Instead of trying to irrigate continuously like in modern farming, the people of Shivta reversed the logic. They did not control water over time, but over space. When rain fell, water was not kept where it landed. It was redirected from large catchment areas and concentrated into smaller farming plots. This created a water amplification effect, turning a small amount of rainfall into enough moisture to sustain crops for weeks, even months. Low stone walls built around agricultural areas did more than retain soil, they acted as flow regulators. They slowed the movement of water, allowing it to seep deeply into the ground, instead of washing away. The soil retained moisture longer, enabling plant roots to access a more stable water supply. This was not a single solution, but an integrated system where every element, terrain, materials, water flow, and crops was carefully calculated and coordinated. What is truly astonishing is the precision of this system. Without modern measuring tools or computer models, the people of Shivta seemed to understand exactly how water behaved in their environment. They knew where to place channels, where to build cisterns, and which areas were best suited for cultivation. This was more than experience. It was a form of environmental science, accumulated over generations, a kind of knowledge that modern society is still trying to rediscover. Another aspect that deepens the mystery is the possibility that this agricultural system did more than sustain the local population. Some studies suggest that Shivta may have produced wine from grapes, a high-value commodity in the Byzantine world. If true, Shivta was not just a survival settlement, but a production center capable of participating in broader trade networks. This raises an even greater question. How could a system entirely dependent on rainfall become stable enough to generate surplus for trade? From a modern perspective, scientists have attempted to study and recreate these techniques, especially in the context of climate change and sustainable agriculture. Shivta has become a kind of natural laboratory for understanding how ancient people adapted to extreme environments. However, fully reconstructing this system remains a major challenge. Not only have environmental conditions changed over time, but subtle factors such as site selection, channel construction, and soil management may have been lost. The existence of such an agricultural system also reflects a highly organized society. A complex system like this could not function without coordination among community members. Building and maintaining water channels, managing scarce resources, and distributing water across farmland required discipline and structured organization. This suggests that Shivta was not just a place to live, but a society with knowledge structure and a high level of environmental adaptation. And then, just like its miraculous existence, this agricultural system disappeared quietly. Around the 7th century, Shivta was abandoned. There are no signs of war, no evidence of sudden destruction, and no traces of a major catastrophe. The city appears to have been left in an orderly manner. Fields that were once fertile gradually dried out, water channels became buried under sand, and the entire life-sustaining system turned into ruins. Today, standing among the remains of Shivta, one sees not only ancient structures, but also a profound unanswered question. How did ancient people understand and control their environment well enough to create life where it seemed impossible? And more importantly, can we relearn what they once knew? Shivta is not just an archaeological site. It is a reminder that in the past, humanity may have achieved a level of harmony with nature that we still do not fully comprehend. And perhaps within those vanished fields, the greatest secrets of Shivta are still waiting to be uncovered. What do you think is the biggest mystery of Shivta? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden along the slopes of Trirashmi Hill near Nashik, in Maharashtra, India, Pandavleni caves have long stood as one of the most intriguing ancient rock-cut cave complexes. Dating back to around the 3rd century BCE and continuously expanded over several centuries, this site is not merely a monastic center of ancient Buddhism, but a striking testament to a level of engineering and architectural thinking far beyond what is often attributed to early civilizations. From the very first glance, Pandavleni evokes the sense that it is not simply the result of manual labor, but the product of a sophisticated system of knowledge where every detail was calculated with astonishing precision. And the deeper one explores these caves, the more it becomes clear that the greatest mystery lies not in what can be seen, but in how it was created. The name Pandavleni evokes the Pandavas from the epic Mahabharata, yet archaeological evidence shows no direct connection between these legendary figures and the caves. This has led many scholars to believe that the name is a later cultural addition, a kind of layered memory imposed after the original function of the site had faded from collective awareness. This mismatch highlights an important point. Pandavleni is not only a physical relic, but also a space where history and mythology overlap, creating a narrative that is both clear and ambiguous at the same time. What truly sets Pandavleni apart is not its name or even its religious function, but its dual role. Brahmi inscriptions carved into the stone walls reveal that the caves were funded not only by kings and elites, but also by merchants and long-distance traders. This suggests that Pandavleni was situated along a major trade route, serving as a stopping point where travelers gathered goods were exchanged and ideas circulated. The fusion of religion and commerce transformed Pandavleni into a vibrant hub of the ancient world, a place where spiritual life and economic activity were not separate but deeply interconnected. Yet all of these elements seem to serve merely as a backdrop to a far greater mystery: the astonishing precision of its rock-cutting techniques. Unlike conventional stone construction, Pandavleni was not built by assembling materials, but by carving directly into a solid mass of rock. This means that the entire interior columns, halls, ceilings, and walls was released from the stone, rather than constructed piece by piece. Such a method is inherently risky, as even a minor mistake could irreversibly ruin the entire structure. What is even more remarkable is that this process was carried out from the top downward. This required ancient craftsmen to fully visualize the internal structure while the rock was still completely solid. Without modern blueprints, 3D models, or advanced measuring tools, they managed to create spaces with nearly perfect proportions. The columns align with astonishing precision, the spacing between them is almost uniformly consistent, and the surfaces are finished so smoothly that it is difficult to believe they were shaped using only primitive tools such as hammers and chisels. Beyond geometric precision, the architectural details reveal a profound understanding of structural integrity and spatial design. Ceilings are often slightly curved, a feature that may help distribute weight and enhance stability. Corridors are arranged in such a way that natural light penetrates deep into the interior, creating spaces that feel enclosed, yet not entirely cut off from the outside world. These elements are clearly not accidental. They suggest a standardized body of knowledge and architectural language that ancient craftsmen had mastered and consistently applied. The central question remains: how was this achieved? How could such precision be maintained in an enclosed space where even the smallest error could have catastrophic consequences? Some theories propose the use of measuring cords, marking systems, using pigments, or basic geometric principles to guide the carving process. However, even with these explanations, it remains difficult to fully account for the extraordinary level of uniformity and precision seen at Pandavleni. Here, precision is not merely functional, it approaches perfection, something rarely achieved even in many modern constructions. Some researchers have suggested that the techniques used at Pandavleni may reflect a level of knowledge far more advanced than we currently understand. It is possible that certain methods or tools once existed but were never recorded or were lost over time. When compared to other rock-cut complexes such as Ajanta and Ellora, striking similarities in technique and style emerge as if they all belong to a shared architectural tradition, one whose origins remain unclear. The location of Pandavleni further deepens its mystery. Positioned high above the surrounding landscape, the caves offer a commanding view of the region below. This suggests that they may have served not only spiritual purposes, but also functions related to observation or control. This raises an intriguing question: were the builders merely monks, or were they also individuals who understood the strategic value of terrain? Could Pandavleni have functioned as a multi-purpose center, where religion, commerce, and strategy converged? Like many ancient sites, Pandavleni eventually fell into obscurity. There is no clear historical record explaining its decline. Possible reasons include shifts in trade routes, the waning influence of Buddhism in the region, or political upheavals that went undocumented. Yet what is remarkable is that despite centuries of abandonment, the caves remain largely intact, standing as a testament to the durability of their construction and a reminder that our understanding of the past may only scratch the surface of a much deeper reality. Today, standing before Pandavleni, one does not simply see carved stone, but the imprint of an ancient intelligence, one that knew how to transform raw rock into living space, how to impose order on rough material, and how to turn technological limitations into creative strength. At the same time, it poses a profound question: have we truly grasped the capabilities of ancient civilizations, or are there still chapters of history hidden within these silent stones? Pandavleni caves, therefore, are more than an archaeological site. They are an unsolved puzzle, a reminder that the past may have been far more complex and advanced than we have ever imagined. And perhaps it is precisely the silence of these stone walls, combined with their near unexplainable precision, that makes Pandavleni more mysterious than ever. So what do you think? Are the Pandavleni caves simply the result of extraordinary human skill using primitive tools? Or do they hint at a level of knowledge and technique that has been lost to time? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. At the base of El Castillo, Chichen Itza, within one of the most iconic archaeological landscapes of the ancient world, lies an artifact that rarely commands attention, yet quietly carries a profound paradox: the El Castillo Red Disk. Amid the vast expanse of Chichen Itza, where every architectural detail reflects a fusion of mathematics, astronomy, and ritual, this red disk does not stand out for its size or placement. And yet it is precisely this modest presence that has made it one of the most quietly debated objects among researchers. Because beneath its simplicity lies a question that reaches beyond conventional archaeology: have we truly understood the technological capabilities of the Maya? Or are we still missing fragments of knowledge lost to time? What makes the El Castillo Red Disk truly remarkable is not its symbols or decorative elements, but something far more fundamental and far more difficult to achieve in the ancient world: an almost perfect level of geometric precision. Upon close examination, the disk is not simply circular. It exhibits a degree of uniformity that closely approaches the standards of modern machine-crafted objects. Measurements taken across multiple points along its diameter reveal an extraordinary consistency with virtually no detectable deviation. In a handcrafted context, where every strike and every pass of grinding introduces cumulative error, maintaining such a flawless circle is not merely challenging, it stands in direct opposition to the inherent limitations of traditional manual production. This anomaly becomes even more striking when examining the disk's edge. In most ancient artifacts, the edges are where imperfections inevitably surface: subtle inconsistencies in force shifts in angle, and the intuitive adjustments of the artisan all leave their mark. But in the case of the El Castillo Red Disk, these familiar patterns seem to vanish. The edge is not only perfectly round, it is smoothed to a degree that makes identifying tool marks nearly impossible. There are no random scratches, no slight distortions, no signs of off-center shaping. Instead, the entire circumference forms a continuous, seamless curve, one that appears to have been generated by a stable rotational motion around a fixed axis. In modern engineering, such a signature is typically associated with lathe-based machining or controlled rotational fabrication. This observation has given rise to one of the most debated hypotheses: the possibility of a rotational grinding technique. According to this idea, the disk may have been rotated around a fixed axis, while a stationary grinding tool gradually shaped it into a near-perfect circle. In theory, such a method could achieve an exceptional level of precision even when using relatively simple tools. Yet this is where the paradox emerges. There is no archaeological evidence to support the existence of such a system within Maya civilization. No remains of rotational devices, no supporting mechanisms, and no carvings or written records describing such a process have ever been found. The artifact itself appears to bear the signature of a controlled mechanical method, yet all tangible evidence of that method is entirely absent. The precision extends beyond the overall shape into the organization of the disk's surface. Concentric circles, if present, remain perfectly aligned with the geometric center. Symbols are distributed evenly along the circumference, with no clustering, no drift, and no irregular rhythm that would suggest manual placement. The spacing between repeated elements is strikingly consistent, giving the impression of a measured system rather than intuitive design. This raises the possibility that the maker employed not just skill, but a structured geometric framework, perhaps an invisible template or proportional system used to maintain symmetry across the entire surface. When viewed within the broader context of Maya civilization, this level of precision is no longer entirely isolated. The Maya demonstrated extraordinary control over geometry and spatial design in monumental architecture, such as El Castillo itself, where light and shadow are orchestrated to produce precise visual effects during equinoxes. These alignments required not only astronomical knowledge, but also exact geometric planning. Within this framework, the red disk may not be merely decorative or ceremonial, it may have functioned as a tool. Perhaps a device for observation measurement, or even a scaled model representing celestial cycles. If so, then its geometric precision would not be incidental, it would be essential. Another layer of complexity emerges from the disk's surface finish. Beyond its perfect circular form, the disk exhibits a high degree of smoothness, suggesting meticulous polishing. Some analyses indicate that it may have possessed reflective properties, hinting at its potential use as a reflective surface in rituals or observational practices. If this were the case, the disk's perfect geometry would directly influence how light interacts with it. Even a slight irregularity along the edge could alter the path of reflected light, affecting its intended function. Once again, geometric precision appears not as an aesthetic choice, but as a functional necessity. As analysis deepens, the El Castillo red disk becomes a point of convergence between two contrasting interpretations of ancient technology. One perspective sees it as the pinnacle of craftsmanship, a testament to what human skill, patience, and accumulated knowledge can achieve without modern machinery. From this view, the disk reflects a level of mastery that we may still underestimate today. The other perspective raises a more provocative question. Could there have been techniques, tools, or knowledge systems that have since been lost? Methods that once existed, but left behind no clear trace, except in the precision of the objects themselves. If the first interpretation is correct, then the Maya achieved a level of geometric control far beyond what we currently credit them with, capable of producing near-perfect forms using only simple tools. If the second is true, then the red disk may represent one of the few surviving traces of a forgotten technological tradition. Either way, one conclusion remains unavoidable. The El Castillo red disk cannot be dismissed as an ordinary artifact. In the end, it stands as an open question etched into the form of a nearly perfect circle, resting within a world we believe we understand. It challenges not only our assumptions about ancient technology, but also the limits of our own interpretation. And perhaps its greatest mystery lies not in what it shows us, but in how much of it we still fail to truly understand. What do you think? Was the El Castillo red disk the result of extraordinary human craftsmanship, or could it be evidence of a lost technology we have yet to rediscover? Share your thoughts in the comments below.